The Underworld Empire. By Branton. In March of 1980, John J. Williams, a New Mexico patriot who published the anti-communist-oriented Rebel magazine, at the time available from Consumertronics Company, C/O John J. Williams. President, 2011 Crescent Dr. P.O. Drawer 537. Alamogordo, New Mexico 88310 revealed some incredible details on an alleged subterranean system which the Navy had been exploring below the western United States. The report appeared in issue No. 6 of his magazine, and was later reproduced in the fall 1985 number 164 issue of Search magazine, at the time edited by Marjorie Palmer, widow of the late Ray Palmer. The article, titled "California Floats on Ocean?" revealed the following. Some time ago, I heard a man on a TV interview show briefly mention that parts of California and neighboring states are floating on the Pacific Ocean. He was a high-ranking naval officer on a top-secret nuclear submarine that has been and is exploring and mapping these enormous caverns and passageways underneath the West for over 10 years now. A friend of mine finally tracked the man down. He is now living quietly in retirement and asked that no details pointing to him be revealed as he does not want publicity and government attention. After writing this article, I destroyed my files on him. This is his story. Williams explains that not all of the areas in question are actually resting or floating on the ocean. However, there are allegedly many subterranean cavities below the western United States, and they are not limited to California, and many of them consist of very large water-filled ecosystems. These have been explored via nuclear submarines to several hundred miles inland, particularly in the region of Southern California and the Southern Oregon, Northern California area. Williams continues. When he retired several years ago, in spite of about 10 years of intensive naval study, the Navy had not gotten even a handle on their exacts and dimensions. Today, the story may be different. He makes the following statements from his observations. 1. The passageways are labyrinthine with widths from a few to thousands of feet, caverns, averaging roughly about 100 feet. 2. Much like dry caverns do, heights and depths vary a great deal, and in some cases, two or more caverns or passageways pass over or under each other at different depths. 3. Most of the entrances lie just off the continental shelf, that is, in the continental slope, Branton. 4. Most of the entrances are too small for submarine investigation, and many that are large enough lie in waters that are too deep. 5. Some of the caverns in California are topped with oil, while some others are filled with gases believed to approximate our atmosphere in very ancient times. 6. The San Joaquin Valley is essentially a portion of the original cavernous area that collapsed eons ago due to its sheer weight. 7. What is being passed off as the San Andreas Fault are large, unsupported chambers that are in the process of collapsing. When the big one finally hits, many scientists in the know believe that most of California will break off like a cold Hershey bar and slide into the ocean. It is postulated by some that an ancient land mass, which some believe may have been connected to what is now California, broke off and sunk into the ocean during an ancient cataclysm. Branton, 8. We are deleting this section due to the possibility of undue stress and fear which may result from its disclosure. Also, because of recent international events which may have resulted in a solution to this problem. We will merely state that it involves a scenario similar to that which was portrayed in a James Bond movie, and which concerned underground caverns, Silicon Valley, nuclear weapons, and the San Andreas Fault. Branton. 9. A well-known United States nuclear submarine, Thresher, lost its way in these passages and disappeared forever. It was reported to have been lost in open sea elsewhere to keep the American people in total ignorance and to justify an enormous payoff to an eccentric United States billionaire, Howard Hughes, who died in recent years for providing the fictitious recovery effort. I have no reason to doubt the man. I can't tell for sure whether or not these caverns and passageways exist or to their extents. The story does sound a bit fantastic, but I have no reason to doubt the man. I have seen copies of documentation that at least prove that he was a high-ranking naval officer, nuclear submarine duty, and a distinguished scientist. In fact, his scientific background and reputation are impeccable. He definitely cannot be labeled as a crackpot, lunatic, or publicity seeker. I would very much like more information on this topic. After further inquiries to Mr. Williams on the part of Inner Earth researchers, Williams responded with the following when asked whether or not he had received any replies to his request for more information about the alleged passageways below California. Since publishing our article on the vast cavern network under much of California, we have received many responses and inquiries. Some of these responses appear to be knowledgeable sources. Note that the material sent to us for this article was written by someone of very high repute whose credentials I personally checked out. Due to an agreement with him, I cannot reveal his identity. One response was from a retired, conventional submarine duty Branton submarine commander, who according to him, spent many years in the waters off California. He stated that the caverns do not exist. Another response was from an anonymous person who cited unpublished oil company seismographical data, and stated, although most of the caverns you depict in your drawing are smaller, larger or located somewhat differently than the actual caverns, you are essentially correct. My information is more up-to-date than what you apparently relied upon. He or she did not supply any maps to pin down our differences, just some written descriptions. However, some knowledgeable person could probably deduce his or her overall map from the voluminous seismographical data sent. I am in the process of looking for this input. It's been several years now and it may have all been thrown out. Incidentally, the oil company's seismic data had much data around the Fresno area if that helps any. One incident which tends to confirm the fact that California is in fact floating on the ocean was a story which made the headlines in recent years. This incident involved an oil discovery beneath Long Beach, California. When oil companies began pumping oil out of the ground beneath Long Beach, it was soon learned that the entire city began sinking into the ocean. It sank up to 26 feet and dikes had to be built to keep out the water. The problem is temporarily being rectified by water injection pumping an equivalent amount of water into the ground to the amount of oil and water taken out, in order to keep the city afloat. One thing which may be of interest in connection with Mr. Williams' account was a statement which was made by a prominent California Bigfoot investigator by the name of Virginia Louise Swanson, who has done a good deal of study on caves and their connections to the Bigfoot phenomena. She refers to these caverns in the following words. Somewhere I got the idea that a big portion of Death Valley is located on a shelf of false bedrock. A certain type of earthquake would collapse all of it down to an enormous series of caverns that would open up into another Grand Canyon. According to our knowledge, the only nuclear submarines ever to disappear under mysterious circumstances were the U.S. Thresher and the U.S. Scorpion. It is uncertain whether the retired Navy officer who John J. Williams spoke of was referring to the Thresher or the Scorpion, although the disappearance of the Thresher probably caused more publicity. The Thresher was the lead ship or flag ship in the world's most advanced class of nuclear attack submarines. She was designed to operate deeper and more silently than any of her predecessors, and was also endowed with significant advances in sonar equipment, in noise reduction, and in fire control. All in all, she was the most advanced international submarine in the world at the time of her disappearance, and would have been an ideal choice for a top-secret mission such as the exploration of the caverns mentioned by John Williams' source. On April 10, 1963, according to official reports, the Thresher, under the command of Lieutenant Commander John W. Harvey, USN, with a total of 129 men, comprised of the crew, civilian technicians, and observers, disappeared without explanation. Not a single trace or clue as to the fate of the craft, or its occupants, were ever recovered. No oil slicks, radiation, floating debris, or similar signs of wreckage were ever seen. It is interesting to note that almost all of the reports at the time stated the ship had disappeared, or was lost, not sunk. One woman whose husband was on the ill-fated ship reported her belief that her husband was still alive. Theologically speaking, the possibility of a long-distance connection or communion on a deep, emotional level between a husband and a wife should not necessarily be consigned to the realm of the occult or psychic phenomena. Many religions believe that the very spiritual natures of a husband and a wife are united upon the consummation of a marriage, and thus they become, as Christian teachings say, one flesh. The actual words of this woman, who was interviewed by Will Carson and Jeannie Joy, two writers devoted to pursuing strange events shortly after the Thresher incident, were as follows. My husband was on the submarine Thresher when it disappeared. I don't consider myself a widow. I don't believe my husband is dead. No, it's not a matter of just not being able to believe it, to accept reality. I just can't get over the conviction that he's still alive somewhere. I love my husband very much. I know he loves me. We were very close. We could always tell when something was wrong with each other. Intuition, I guess. I should have felt something the instant there was trouble, If he was really in serious trouble and knew it a matter of life and death, but I didn't. What do you believe really happened? Carson and Joy asked the attractive young woman. Most people think I'm crazy when I say this, but I believe the Thresher was captured. By whom? I can't say for sure, but there was a Russian submarine spotted near there that day, that is, near where it reportedly vanished 220 miles off Boston Harbor. Only I can't imagine how even the Russians could capture a vessel like the Thresher without leaving the slightest evidence. The following account, concerning an area just east of Bishop Owens Valley, California, was related by Val Valerian in his leading-edge newsletter, December 1989, January 1990 issue. The article, titled, Deep Springs, California, stated, Deep Springs, California is an area that is becoming known as the site for very strange events. According to the information released both on the air on KVEJM and from other sources, the area is full of strange people wandering around in black suits. There have also been rumors that there is an underground facility in the area. Checking with gravity anomaly maps proved that there are large cavities under the ground in that area. The wildest claims relative to the area have stated that alien life forms are being released there. Deep Springs Lake has been probed and it appears bottomless. Divers have traveled along an underground river 27 miles toward the Las Vegas area before having to turn around. This river would probably have been a partially water-filled cave with a large stream or river flowing through it, rather than an entirely underwater passage, since 27 miles would undoubtedly be entirely out of the question if it were all underwater travel, with present diving technology. Branton. In the April 1963 issue of Search magazine, Will Carson and Jeannie Joy, in their regular column Prying into the Unknown, related the following incredible story. It has always been a mystery to us in the first place how Mr. and Mrs. P.E. can find and afford the time to do the sort of things most of us only dream of doing. After knowing them for more than 15 years, it is inconceivable to suspect their integrity or sanity, and yet they impose the following excise upon our credulity. While exploring for petroglyphs in the Casa Diablo vicinity of Bishop, California, Mr. and Mrs. P.E. came upon a circular hole in the ground, about 9 feet in diameter, which exuded a sulfurous steam and seemed recently to have been filled with hot water. A few feet from the surface the shaft took a tangent course which looked easily accessible and, upon an impulse with which we cannot sympathize, the dauntlesses, armed only with a flashlight, forthwith crawled down into that hole. At a depth we've failed to record, the oblique tunnel opened into a horizontal corridor whose dripping walls, now encrusted with minerals, could only have been carved by human hands, countless ages ago. Of this these felt certain. The end of the short passage was blocked by what seemed to be a huge doorway of solid rock which, however, wouldn't yield. The light of their flash was turned to a corner where water dripped from a protuberance, which proved to be a delicately carved face, distorted now by the crystallized minerals, and from whose gaping mouth water issued. As Mr. and Mrs. E stood there in silent awe, wondering what lay behind that immovable door, the strangest thing of all happened. But our chronology will not be incorrect if we wait till they return to the surface before revealing this, for now the water began gushing from the carved mouth and from other unseen ducts elsewhere in that cave and rising at an alarming rate. They hurried to the surface, and in less than half an hour there was only a quite ordinary appearing pool of warm mineral water on the desert floor. "Do you know," Mrs. E said to her husband, "while I stood down there I heard music, the strangest, most weird music I'd ever heard. But it seemed to come from everywhere at once, or inside my own head. I guess it was just my imagination." Mr. E turned pale. "My God," he said. "I thought it was my imagination, but I heard it, too, like music from some other world." "Why do they call that rock formation near where these had their strange experience Casa Diablo, the Devil's House? And why did the Indians name that area Inyo, dwelling place of the Great Spirit?" Eric A. Agon, Jr., in his article Top Secret, Alien UFO Bases, Search magazine, summer 1991 issue, presented the following revelations concerning the UFO subterranean connection. A great deal of UFO research has also led to the conclusion that various species of aliens have set up secret underground bases in the United States and other countries. It is logical to assume that such bases have also been established elsewhere in the solar system. If such bases exist, where would we find them? Existing information allows us to make a few educated guesses. Earth bases, underground, the dark, cavernous world beneath our feet is the source of many baffling mysteries. Clandestine UFO bases may be hidden deep within the earth and natural and artificial caverns. As a former member of the National Speleological Society (NSS), I am well aware of the vast extent of cave systems within the United States. In my own native state of Missouri, for example, there are over 2,500 known caves and dozens of new ones being discovered every year. Many of these caves are intricately linked together by numerous passageways and interconnecting chambers. One particular species of blind white albino cave fish, the Typhlichthys, has been found in many widely separated cave systems over several states. It has been found in caves that make a great arc through Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois and under the Mississippi River extending into Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. A vast section of the central and southern United States must lie above one immense cavern system. Many caves possess rooms hundreds of feet in length, width, and height. In most cases, these huge natural caverns can only be reached and explored with the utmost skill and perseverance. There are only a few thousand NSS members in the United States, and only a few hundred of this number are active spelunkers. With so few spelunkers spread over such a large area, only a very small fraction of the tens of thousands of known caves in this country have been carefully mapped and explored. Thousands of other caves remain undiscovered and unexplored. Extensive evidence indicates that caves in the United States may be connected with caves in other parts of the world. In Mexico, the cave known as Sótano de las Golondrinas, or Basement of the Swallows, in the Municipio de Aquismo, SLP, reaches a depth of 1,100 feet, 334 meters. The cave is actually a giant sinkhole or hole in the ground with a nearly circular opening at the top, hundreds of feet in diameter. It is impossible to climb down the sides of Golondrinas because the walls of the opening are too smooth and belled out. To reach the bottom of the cave, a special rope over 1,100 feet long must be secured at the top of the opening and dropped into the sinkhole. Explorers must then descend into the yawning hole one at a time using special cave-repelling gear and climbing techniques. At the bottom of Sótano de las Golondrinas are numerous leads or openings to a multiplicity of different crevices, passages, crawlways, and rooms which have never been mapped or investigated. The entrance to Golondrinas is located in one of the most primitive and uncivilized areas of Mexico, and local inhabitants are afraid to approach the cave because they believe it is full of evil spirits which lure people to their deaths. They tell stories of people mysteriously disappearing never to be heard from again while passing near the cave entrance. These stories may be based more on fact than fiction. They are similar in some respects to UFO abduction reports. Because of its huge size, remote location, and unique geological structure, Golondrinas would be an ideal UFO base. Naturally camouflaged caves in other parts of the world may serve as excellent natural bases, way stations, and depots for UFOs. An underground nuclear test called the Schooner experiment conducted in December 1968, substantiates the theory that caves in North and South America are intimately linked. In this test, a 35-kiloton nuclear bomb was exploded onto the desert of Nevada. 5 days after the test, the radiation level rose from 10 to 20 times in Canada, 1,000 miles away from the Nevada test site. The only way the radioactive dust could have traveled that far is through an interconnected system of caves extending all the way from Nevada to Canada. Burt Lee, in his book Death Valley Men, Macmillan Company, New York 1932, chapter, Old Gold, describes a conversation which he had several years ago with a small group of Death Valley residents. The conversation had eventually turned to the subject of Paiute Indian legends. At one point two of the men, Jack and Bill, described their experience with an underground city which they claimed to have discovered after one of them had fallen through the bottom of an old mine shaft near Wingate Pass. They found themselves in a natural underground cavern which they claimed to have followed about 20 miles north into the heart of the Panamint Mountains. To their amazement, they allegedly found themselves in a huge, ancient, underground cavern city. They claimed that they discovered within the city several perfectly preserved mummies, which wore thick armbands, wielded gold spears, etc. The city had apparently been abandoned for ages, except for the mummies, and the entire underground system looked very ancient. It was formerly lit, they found out by accident, by an ingenious system of lights fed by subterranean gases. They claimed to have seen a large, polished round table which looked as if it may have been part of an ancient council chamber, giant statues of solid gold, stone vaults and drawers full of gold bars and gemstones of all kinds, heavy stone wheelbarrows which were perfectly balanced and scientifically constructed so that a child could use them, huge stone doors which were almost perfectly balanced by counterweights, and other incredible sights. They also claimed to have followed the caverns upwards to a higher level which ultimately opened out onto the face of the Panamints, about halfway up the eastern slope, in the form of a few ancient tunnel-like quays. They realized that the valley below was once underwater, and they eventually came to the conclusion that the arched openings were ancient docks for sea vessels. They could allegedly see Furnace Creek Ranch and wash far below them. They told Berkeley that they had brought some of the treasure out of the caverns and tried to set up a deal with certain people, including scientists associated with the Smithsonian Institute, in order to gain help to explore and publicize the city as one of the wonders of the world. These efforts ended in disappointment, however, when a friend of theirs stole the treasure, which was also the evidence, and they were scoffed at and rejected by the scientists when they went to show them the mine entrance and could not find it. A recent cloudburst, they claimed, had altered and rearranged the entire countryside, and the landscape did not look like it had been before. When Lee last heard from the two men, Bill and Jack, they were preparing to climb the east face of the Panamints to locate the ancient tunnel openings or quays high up the side of the steep slope. Berkeley never did see or hear from his friends ever again. During the lengthy conversation wherein they first revealed the secret of the underground city to Lee and others, the discussion turned to the topic of a Paiute Indian legend that they had heard, which was remarkably similar to an ancient Grecian myth. The Paiute legend concerned a tribal chief whose wife had died, and who according to the tradition took a spiritual journey to the underworld to find her, and upon returning with her he looked back, and as this was forbidden he was not allowed to bring his wife back with him from the dead. This would not be the same as the more tangible story related in an earlier file, as told by the Navajo Make, concerning a Paiute chief who was allegedly physically taken into the underground cities of the Havmasuvs deep below the Panamints. After this legend was referred to, the conversation turned to a discussion of an alleged subterranean race, who were believed to inhabit very deep caverns far below the Death Valley area. Paiute legends of the Havmasuvs indicate that these ancient dwellers of the Panamints abandoned the ancient city within the mountain itself and migrated to deeper and larger caverns below. Could the following story tie in with the Paiute legends of the Havmasuvs? We will enter the conversation with the following discourse from Berkeley. The professor and Jack and Bill sat in the little canvas house in Immigrant Canyon and heard the legend all the way through. The professor said, that story, in its essentials, is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Single quote, why yes, I said. It's also a Paiute legend. Some Indians told that legend to John Wesley Powell in the 60s. That's very interesting, said the professor. It's so close a parallel to Orpheus and Eurydice that the story might well have been lifted bodily from the Greeks. Jack said, I wouldn't be surprised. I knew a Greek. I forgot his name, but he ran a restaurant in almost every mining town I ever was in. He was an extensive wanderer. The Greeks are great travelers. Bill said, they don't mean restaurant Greeks. The Greeks they were talking about have been dead for thousands of years. What of it? Asked Jack. Maybe the early Greeks was great travelers, too. The professor said, it's very interesting. No. About that tunnel, said Bill, with his forehead wrapped in a frown. You said this Indian went through a tunnel into a strange country, didn't you? Single quote, why yes, I said. I think I called it a cave or a cavern, but I suppose a miner would call it a tunnel. Why? Here's a funny thing, said Bill. This Indian trapper living right across the canyon has a story about a tunnel, and it's not 1,000 years old either. Tom Wilson told me that his grandfather went through this tunnel and disappeared. He was gone 3 years, and when he came back he said he'd been in a strange country living among strange people. That tunnel is supposed to be somewhere in the Panamints not awful far from where we were sitting. Now, what do you make of that? Jack said, I think Tom's grandfather was an awful liar. I said, Tom's grandfather lived when the Paiutes were keeping their tribal lore alive. He probably knew the old legend. Powell heard it in Nevada only 65 years ago. It's very interesting, said the professor. I got an idea about it, said Bill, thoughtfully. Tom's grandfather might have wandered into some tunnelography from Coon Jim Weed and then come out and found some early whites and stayed with them. Tom told me that the people spoke a queer language and ate food that was new to his grandfather and wore leather clothes. They had horses and they had gold. It might have been a party in Panamint Valley, or even early explorers or early settlers in Owens Valley. How about that? Jack said, yeah. The Spaniards was in here, too. So it might have been Spaniards or the early Greeks. And, where is this tunnel? And why did Tom's grandfather have trouble speaking the language? This is an entirely different story than the one Buck told. We are arriving at no place at all with these Indians and Greeks. To return for a moment to our discussion of geology, Professor. Have you been in Nevada much? From here the conversation took off in an entirely new direction. Some years ago a woman by the name of Joan Howard, at the time living in Eastern Canada although originally from Britain, wrote a manuscript in which she described her own paranormal experiences with small alien entities. Joan had experienced several UFO-type abduction encounters while at a very young age when she still lived in Britain, and claimed to have had psychic contact with beings that claimed to be of extraterrestrial origin. These experiences were accompanied by a great deal of occultic manifestations such as poltergeist phenomena, psychic dreams, encounters with invisible entities, etc. Joan even admitted that she often doubted the claims of these beings, that their actions were manipulative and just didn't seem to coincide with their claims that they were here as some kind of group of cosmic saviors to lead humanity into a new age of enlightenment. She also warned other researchers to retain a keen, analytical mind when dealing with alien entities so as not to fall under possible deception or manipulation. Perhaps, as she suggested to others, they might actually be here to prepare for a future invasion of this planet and were merely using her for various purposes to help prepare the way, and that all of their benevolence talk was just that. Talk. She did describe vivid dreams in which she saw alien craft hovering over major cities blasting frightened and terrified people in the streets with powerful beam weapons, dreams which she suggested might be somewhat prophetic in nature. She described the entities as being small or dwarfish, yet was unsure whether they were human or not, although they did attempt to pass themselves off as some type of evolved human species, something which the Greys have apparently done in order to break down any natural enmity which might prevent their contactees or abductees from receiving the lies which they intentionally fed them as part of their program of conquest and control. Joan Howard, incidentally, wrote a privately published book, titled The Space, or Something, Connection. We refer to it here because it dealt with some experiences which she, or rather her husband, had shortly after she came to America. In fact, she devoted an entire chapter to her husband's account, which involved some incidents that took place while he was doing some field work for a certain company, which required a great deal of activity in the out-of-doors. During his employment with this company, he and his co-workers had to travel through some relatively unpopulated terrain in West Virginia, particularly in the regions between Newville in Braxton County, and Helvetia in Randolph County, or rather the general region in and around the northern part of Webster County. During their travels through the forests and wilderness, and the rolling hills mountains of West Virginia, he had encountered some very strange things, and heard accounts of strange cave-related incidents from the locals. At one point, he claimed, their group ran across what appeared to be a pipe sticking up from the ground far from the nearest town. There was no other sign of civilization or anything man-made for miles on either side, yet here was this large pipe or tube sticking straight up from the ground. But the most remarkable thing was that a flame was shooting out of the pipe as if it were burning some type of gas. They never found out just what it was. Also, in the same general area, they explored caverns which contained some very strange things. One of the caverns had strange hieroglyphic-like writing on its walls, and others claimed that they heard what sounded like faint voices and sounds like machines moving underground coming as if from beyond the walls of the caverns, or from their unexplored depths. Two men, he claimed, bedded down one night in front of a certain cave which contained a very deep, unexplored chasm some ways inside. The next morning one of the men woke up and found that his partner had disappeared, and no trace was ever found of him. This particular cave, by the way, had been known as a place of unusual happenings, and a place to stay away from. Some even went so far as to call it Satan's lair. Whatever the case may be, it may provide an answer to the man's disappearance. One of the most remarkable accounts that Joan's husband heard involved a man who claimed that, while exploring the labyrinthine depths of a particular cavern in the area, he had suddenly come face to face with a woman. She was attractive yet completely void of hair, such as someone who might have been subjected to radiation poisoning. The woman, who spoke a language completely foreign to the man, tried for some time to communicate. After they found that they were not getting anywhere, they departed and went their separate ways. According to an item which appeared in the Leading Edge magazine, a well-known Los Angeles talk show host by the name of Ken Hugnall announced over the air on November 3, 1989, his intention to take a group to visit one of the ancient underground cities, which he says is an entrance 60 miles from Anaheim, California. In 1962, a researcher by the name of Chuck Edwards released some of his own discoveries concerning the Western Subsurface Drainage Network, which seems to cover parts of Utah, Nevada, and Southern California, where are located many drainage systems which do not ultimately flow into the Pacific Ocean via surface rivers, that is, but instead made their way underground into a vast subterranean drainage system. His letter appeared in issue 8 of The Hidden World, one of the few specialized publications which grew out of the Palmer Shaver controversy of the late 1940s. We quote Mr. Edwards' comments here in part. Note: these comments are addressed in a letter to Richard S. Shaver. This letter is in reply to your January 31st letter. Please forgive me for not answering sooner. Enclosed is some material I hope that you can glean something of value from. Please be as candid as you have been in the past, and if I am far off base, don't hesitate to tell me. Our foundation has located a vast system of underground passages in the Mother Lode country of California. They were first discovered in 1936, ignored by all even with our best efforts to reveal them. Recently a road crew blasted out an opening verifying our claims. One of the chambers is 200 feet long, 70 feet wide and 50 feet high. We have disclosed what we believe to be a vast subterranean drainage system probably traversing the great American desert country for a distance of more than 600 miles. We believe this system extends out like 5 fingers of your hand to such landmarks as Zion Canyon in Utah, the Grand Canyon. Another runs south from the Carson Sink in Nevada, and yet another follows below the western slope of the same range, joining its counterpart and ending somewhere in the Mojave Desert. We believe, contrary to orthodox geologists, that the existence of this underground system drains all surface waters running into Nevada. None, with the exception of the Armagosa, runs out, and accounts for the fact that it is a great American desert. The hairy creatures that you have written about have been seen in several of these areas. Certainly there has been much saucer activity in these parts. For 2 years I have collected material pertinent to these creatures, and if you have any opinions along these lines I would appreciate hearing them. So much for now. I hope that I am still your friend. Much of my time has been devoted to helping a farmer near Portland who has made a fantastic discovery of incredible stone artifacts. He has several tons of them. They predate anything yet found or accepted. Let us say that for now. We are making slow but steady progress in getting through the wall of orthodoxy. Chuck Edwards. Still another possible area in the Mojave Desert region which may connect to this subsurface network involved Iron Mountain, one of the peaks in the El Paso Mountains northeast of Mojave, California. There are many bizarre accounts connected with this mountain, which apparently got its name in part from the many old mines which can be found there, along with numerous natural cavities which open out to the surface in many different areas. The area has allegedly been the site of certain activity concerning Native American Indian occult practices, as well as the site of alleged secret government activity, some of which reportedly involves the observation and monitoring of strange creatures and door automatons, which are said to emerge from the area on certain occasions. Just exactly what these creatures are is uncertain, but some accounts indicate that they are dangerous. Could it also be a magnetic zone due to the high iron content? Following the Sierra Nevada range from here into the Northern Territories, one arrives at the Cascade Range, consisting mostly of dormant or extinct volcanic mountains, which rise at intervals through Northern California, Oregon and Washington, and into southwestern Canada. The Cascade Range is not without its own peculiar accounts of subterranean recesses occupied by unknown beings, both human and non-human, who apparently rediscovered what apparently are parts of ancient antediluvian subsurface networks, which were at one time inhabited by a race of highly technological, through extremely violent and warlike beings, perhaps both human and reptilian. There are many unanswered questions as to just how the subsurface world was used, or exactly what part it played, in relation to these ancient subterranean races, but the following account may explain some of these mysteries and help us to see the entire picture more clearly. Some years ago a man by the name of Ralph B. Fields submitted the following account to Amazing Stories magazine, December 1946 issue, pages 155-157, with the assurance that it was true and actually happened. However, we must be cautious of every tale of this type which might be presented, yet at the same time not deny the possibility of it happening as well. We will leave the reader to draw their own conclusions concerning the account, which we quote as follows. In beginning this narrative and the unexplained events that befell my friend and myself, I offer no explanation, nor do I even profess to offer any reasoned. In fact, I have yet to find a clue that will, even in part, offer any explanation whatever. Yet as it did happen, there must be some rhyme or reason to the whole thing. It may be that someone can offer some helpful information to a problem that just should not exist in these times of enlightenment. To begin with, if we had not been reading an article in a magazine telling us about the great value of guano, that is bat droppings in old caves, which are said to be extremely effective as a fertilizer, Branton, that have accumulated over a great number of years, we would have continued to wend our merry way through life without ever having a thing to worry about. But having read the article as we were at the time living near a small town called Manton in Tehama County, California, we thought that that would be a good country to explore for a possible find to this kind. After talking it over for some time, and as we had plenty of time just then, we decided to take a little trip up the country just back of us. As we were almost at the foot of Mount Lassen, that seemed the best place to conduct our little prospecting tour. So collecting a light camping outfit, together with a couple of tents to sleep in, we started out on what we expected to be a 3 or 4 day jaunt up the mountain. I guess we covered about 10 or 12 miles on the third day, and it was fast approaching time to begin to look for a place to spend the night, and the thought was not very amusing as it had turned a little colder and we were well over 7,000 feet above sea level. We soon found a sheltered place beneath a large outcrop of rock and set about making a camp. As I was always the cook and Joe the chore boy, I began getting things ready to fix us some grub, and Joe began digging around for some dead scrub brush to burn. I had things all ready and looked around for Joe and his firewood, but I could see no signs of him. I began calling for him and he soon came into sight from around the very rock where we were making our camp. And I knew he was laboring under some great excitement, and his face was lit up like a Christmas tree. He had found a cave. The entrance was on the other side of that very rock. He was all for exploration right away. But I argued that we had better wait till morning. But he argued that in a cave it was always night and we would have to use flashlights anyway, so what would be the difference? Well, we finally decided that we would give it at least a once over after we had a bite to eat. It wasn't much to call a cave at first, as it had a very small entrance, but back about 20 feet it widened out to about 10 feet wide and around 8 feet high. And it did reach back a considerable distance, as we would see at least 100 yards, and it appeared to bend off to the left. The floor slipped slightly down. We followed to the bend, and again we could see a long way ahead and down. At this point we became a little afraid, as we were some way into the mountain. The idea of being inside so far seemed to make us a little afraid. But we reasoned that inasmuch as there were no branches or connecting caves we could not get lost, and therefore had nothing to be afraid of. So we went on. We found no sign of anything that we could imagine to be our much-sought guano, nor signs of any animals being inside the cave. I don't know how far we went, but it must have been a mile or two, as we kept on working, and the cave never changed its contour or size. Noticing this, I mentioned it to Joe, and we discovered an amazing thing. The floor seemed to be worn smooth, as though it had been used for a long time as a path or road. The walls and ceiling of the cave seemed to be cut like a tunnel. It was solid rock, and we knew that no one would cut a tunnel there out of rock, as there had been no sign of mining operations, tailings. And the rock in the walls and ceiling was run together like it had been melted, or fused from a great heat. While we were busy examining the cave in general, Joe swore he saw a light way down in the cave. We started down the cave once more and found a light. Or should I say, the light found us, as it was suddenly flashed into our faces. We stood there blinded by it for a minute, until I flashed my light at its source and saw we were confronted by 3 men. These men looked to be about 50 or a little younger. They were dressed in ordinary clothing such as is worn by most working men in the locality. Levi-type pants and flannel shirts and wool coats. They wore no hats. But their shoes looked strange, as their soles were so thick that they gave the impression of being made of wood. John Keel's book The Muthman Prophecies describes men who were seen wearing thick-soled shoes in connection to mid reports. Branton? We just stood there for a minute or two and looked at them. We had no idea there was anybody within miles of us, and there stood 3 men looking at us in a cave a mile or so in the depths of old Mount Lassen. I was scared. We were unarmed, and we knew nothing about these men. One of them spoke to us. He asked what we were looking for. I told him, but I could see he didn't believe it. We both tried to convince him, but he just smiled. We had a little argument with him, but fearing they might be some criminal gang in hiding, we came to the conclusion that we had better retreat. Turning to go, we were confronted by two more of them. I can't find any words to express the fear and utter helplessness I felt in finding our retreat cut off. I do remember having remarked to Joe, "Well, it looks like we are behind the well-known 8-ball." I sure didn't feel as jovial as I spoke either. One of the strangers told us, "I think maybe you had better come with us." We were in no position to argue, though we both would have liked to do a little of that right there, but we had no way of enforcing our arguments. Where could a hero gain any credit in a place like that? So we permitted the 5 to escort us deeper into the depths of Old Lesson. They had led us farther down, and I guess we had gone a couple more miles when we came to the first thing that really amazed us. We came to a place where the cavern widened out a little, and we saw some kind of machine, if it can be called that. Though I had no chance to examine it closely at the time, I did later, and it was a very strange contrivance. It had a very flat bottom, but the front was curved upward something like a toboggan. The bottom plate was about 8 inches thick, and it was the color of pure copper. But it was very hard-tempered. Although I have had a lot of experience in metals and alloys, I had no opportunity to examine it closely enough to determine just what it was. I doubt very much if I could. It had a seat in the front directly behind the heavy dashboard affair, and there was a dial shaped in a semicircle with figures or markings on it. I had not the slightest idea what they stood for, but they were very simple to remember. If there was a motor, it was in the rear. All I could see was 2 horseshoe or magnet-shaped objects that faced each other with the round parts to the outside. When this thing was in operation, a brilliant green arc seemed to leap between the two and to continue to glow as it was in operation. The only sound it gave off was a hum or buzz that sounded like a battery charger in operation. The seat in the front was very wide. The only method of operation was a black tear-shaped object which hung from the panel by a chain. One of these men sitting in the middle took this thing and touched the sharp end to the first figure on the left side of the dial. When he touched the first figure, the contraption seemed to move almost out from under us. But it was the smoothest and quietest takeoff I ever experienced. We seemed to float. Not the slightest sound or vibration. And after we had traveled for a minute, he touched the next figure on the dial, and our speed increased at an alarming rate. But when he had advanced the black object over past the center of the dial, our speed increased until I could hardly breathe. I can't begin to estimate the distance we had traveled or our speed, but it was terrific. The 2 horseshoe objects in the rear created a green light that somehow shone far ahead of us, lighting up the cavern for a long way. I soon noticed a black line running down the center of the cavern, and our inner mountain taxi seemed to follow that. I don't know how long we continued our mad ride, but it was long enough for us to become used to the terrific speed, and we had just about overcome our fear of some kind of wreck when we were thrown into another spasm of fear. Another machine of the same type was approaching us head-on. I could see that our captors were very nervous, but our speed continued. As the other machine became closer, our speed slowed down very fast, and we came to a smooth stop about 2 feet from the front of the other machine. Our machine had no sooner stopped than our captors leapt from the machine and started to dash away. A fine blue light leapt from the other machine and a fine pencil beam, and its sweep caught them and they fell to the cavern and lay still. The figures dismounted from the other machine and came close to us. Then I noticed they carried a strange object in their hands. It resembled a fountain pen flashlight with a large, round, bulb-like affair on the back end and a grip something like a German Luger. They pointed them at us. After seeing what had happened to our erstwhile captors, I thought that our turn was next, whatever it was. But one spoke to us. "Are you surface people?" "I guess we are, as this is where we came from very recently." "Where did the Horlocks find you?" "If you mean those guys there," I pointed to the 5 motionless figures, "back there a few hundred miles." I pointed toward the way we had come in our wild ride. "You were very fortunate that we came this way," he told us. "You would have also become Horlocks, and then we would have had to kill you also." That was the first time I had realized that the others were dead. They put their estranged weapons away and seemed friendly enough, so I ventured to ask them the who and why and everything we had run into. I told them of our search for guano and how we had encountered the 5 Horlocks, as he called them. And also asked him about the machines and their operation and could we get out again? He smiled and told us. I could not tell you too much as you would not understand. There are so many things to explain and you could not grasp enough of what I could myself tell you. The people on the surface are not ready to have the things that the ancients have left. Neither I nor anyone in any of the caverns know why these things work, but we do know how to operate some of them. However, there are a great many evil people here who create many unpleasant things for both us and the surface people. They are safe because no one on the surface believes us or them. That is why I am telling you this. No one would believe that we exist. We would not care, but there are many things here that the outer world must not have until they are ready to receive them, as they would completely destroy themselves, so we must be sure that they do not find them. As for the machine, I don't know how it works. But I know some of the principles of it. It works simply by gravity. And it is capable of reverse. The bottom plate of it always is raised about 4 inches from the surface of the floor. That is why there is no friction and has such a smooth operation. This object suspended from this chain is pure carbon. It is the key to the entire operation. As I told you before, I cannot explain why it runs, but it does. We want you to return to where you came and forget about us. We will show you how to operate the sled and we want you never again to enter the cave. If you do and you do not encounter the Horlocks, we will have to do something about you ourselves, so it would not be advisable to not try to return at all events. One thing I can tell you. We never could permit you to leave another time. He explained to us the operation of the machine and in some way reversed its direction. So thanking them, we seated ourselves in the sled, as he had called it, and were soon on our way back. Our return trip was really something we enjoyed, as I was sure not to advance the carbon far enough on the dial to give us such terrific speed, but we soon found ourselves where we started from. The sled slid to a smooth stop and we jumped out and started up the cave afoot. We must have walked a long way coming in, for we thought we never would come to the surface. But at last we did. And it was late afternoon when we emerged. We lost no time in making our way down the mountain, and Joe tells me that he isn't even curious about what is in that cave. But I am. What is the answer to the whole thing? I would like to know. We had been told enough for me to believe that down there somewhere there are things that might baffle the greatest minds of this earth. Sometimes I'm tempted to go back into that cave if I could find it again, which I doubt, but then I know the warning I heard in there might be too true, so I guess I had better be of the same mind as Joy. He says, what we don't know don't hurt us. Regardless of Joe's opinion, however, there is reason to believe that influences from these nether regions can and do affect us in a profound way, and even the men whom Ralph and Joe encountered, whoever they were, admitted this fact. Is there anything else which we might be able to read into this scenario, based on the accumulated data which we've given in previous files? The men who were encountered do confirm that an ancient antediluvian race did in fact leave behind extremely sophisticated technology, and it is probably true that men in his largely unregenerate state might be influenced to destroy themselves with these sophisticated machinery if given the chance. Then again the so-called Horlocks, perhaps the same as the cybernized, mind-altered and controlled men in black described by John Keel and others, have seemingly utilized such technology without utterly destroying themselves. This could be due to the fact that their controllers, the serpent races, realize the dangers of such technology and desire to conquer without destroying that which they are conquering. Also, man already has enough technology in the form of nuclear weaponry, etc., to destroy himself many times over, but no use adding fuel to the fire, as they say. As for these underground or subsurface people, they are apparently part of a race or races who discovered these recesses either hundreds or thousands of years ago, or perhaps different groups who discovered this network throughout this entire period of time. The Horlocks seem to be a group working under an evil influence, for instance, as we've said, possibly that of the serpent race, since there have been documented connections uncovered between the MIB and the serpent race, as we have seen and will continue to see. The previous account tends to indicate that once one becomes a Horlock, via some mind-altering method of control, reprogramming or implantation cybernization, they become a threat to both surface and subsurface dwellers who are trying to live an existence free from conflict. We would suggest that no one who still possesses a human soul is completely out of the reach of God's power to deliver them from any evil influence until they have left this life, at which point it will be too late. There have been some who have suggested that a human body could, through advanced chromancy or technological chromantic manipulation, be killed, its soul matrix removed, and revived as an operating organism controlled by another non-physical entity or a biocomputer. As strange as it may sound, this would be a high-tech version of the ancient zombie legends which supposedly involve the possession of a human being by a demonic entity after that person has died, or the hypnotizing of a living soul via drugs, etc., into a perpetual catatonic state of control and servitude to a sorcerer, etc. Could this explain why some of the so-called men in black appear to be more mechanical than human, spouting off monotone phrases like a programmed computer? We would suggest, however, that such horrible perversions of nature, if they in fact exist, would not include all of the entities who might be classified under the term MIB or men in black, who have been described as being anything from government silencers to alien humans to implanted humans to cybernized humans to androids to reptilian-like beings attempting to pass themselves off as humans. Perhaps this whole gamut of alien entities just mentioned are involved together in the draconian control scenario. We would suggest that if a human or even a human hybrid or hybrid still retains some semblance of a human soul, there must be a way of breaking the mental control of over such a soul that may be captive to a malevolent power, if that soul is willing, rather than by killing them in order to subdue their influence. The Ralph Fields account referred to several inhabited caverns, obviously connected with this underground subway system. Also, the fact that the Horlocks wore surface clothing would indicate that they probably operate jointly below and above ground, mixing with the inhabitants of the upper world as Keel and others have alleged. Others have described strange activities surrounding Mount Lassen, suggesting that this area is in fact a battleground between benevolent and malevolent powers. Some have stated that there is an alien atmosphere about the place, others have described strange voices which seem to come from nowhere, while still others have described showers or rocks ranging in size from small pea-like pebbles to basketball-sized stones in a few cases. This might result from volcanic activity, then again, it might not. There have even been other accounts suggesting that there is a base near Mount Lassen consisting of joint human sauroid activity, or humans under the control of the serpent race and thus serving their cause. The following account, which we will describe shortly, was released by Val Valerian in June of 1992, and appeared in Leading Edge magazine. The account describes human-sized reptilians who might, with some alterations, be able to pass themselves off as humans, or reptoids that are apparently extremely dangerous and threatening. In fact, there are other accounts that suggest that the human-sized, and larger, sauroids absolutely despise humanity and unlike the saurian greys have been seen to express anger, hatred, impudence and an almost demonic contempt for the human race. Although the greys' enmity against the human race is on the other extreme from that of the reptoids, and consists of emotionless insensitivity and indifference to human life or suffering, it can be just as destructive to humankind as is the raging, murderous hatred of the larger reptoid predators. This is why the saurian greys can dip their arms in a tank full of dismembered human corpses being dissolved into hydrogen peroxide for their protein and enzyme content, and rub this substance over their bodies without the slightest twinge of conscience. As we've said, indifference can be just as destructive as hatred. So one should not consider the greys any better than the reptoids simply because the greys are far more intellectually oriented and more emotionless than the larger sauroids. Nevertheless, since the reptilian hierarchy operates on fear, competition, selfishness, ego and absolute control and is a perfect example of how the demonic or infernal hierarchy itself operates, there will nevertheless be accounts such as the following one which indicate that the lower levels of the reptilian hierarchy are fearful of the higher-ups. This is no doubt due to the fact that execution is sometimes used to make examples, or other forms of punishment is used in order to keep the lower levels in line. And since the soulless reptilians have gained self-realization and are aware that death means complete oblivion to them, such fear of the upper hierarchy would no doubt be explainable. The hybrids, human hybrids possessing a human soul as opposed to the rebrides, or reptilian hybrids possessing no soul matrix, would be another story. There is much evidence that these beings who are bred for slavery from birth are themselves being kept in subjection through fear and intimidation, and possibly even the threat of death. There is also evidence that they are inwardly in opposition to the indifferent greys and the malevolent reptoids. Val Valerian introduces the woman who experienced the encounters that she had with the aliens near Mount Lassen, In the following words, the case of the San Francisco woman is highly illustrative of the abduction situation. This kind lady came to me recently for assistance and is in the process of receiving it. Her case is detailed below in the hope that it will contribute toward additional research in this area. Her name is understandably withheld to maintain confidentiality. We will quote only portions of this lengthy account of a possible encounter with Horlocks under reptilian control. I described an experience I had remembered in reoccurring flashbacks, which took place in the woods somewhere near Mount Lassen, California. I believe the year was 1969 or 1970. What happened there had a profound effect on my life, in a very negative way. I am a 31-year-old woman living in the city of San Francisco. For the past 2 years I have been living in a nightmare of sleepless nights, hellish dreams, strange dreams in which the information given in the dream comes true, what I can only describe as ominous coincidences and manifestations of a paranormal nature, unusual sensations during sleep when I do sleep. And to top it off, a slow but steady flow of bizarre memories in the form of intense flashbacks and nightmares which reoccur constantly of events going all the way back to my early childhood. I can mark the beginning of all this trouble to a Saturday evening in July of 1988 when, while at work, I witnessed a luminous ball of light make a dramatic entrance and exit, stopping long enough to visit with us. I had 5 witnesses in the room with me. From October of 1990 right up through last weekend before I heard you speak, I had been living with a kaleidoscope of images and memories of bizarre encounters and topsy-turvy-like interactions with apparently non-human beings, none of which made any sense to me. While you were speaking it felt as if little bells were going off in my head. I could hardly believe that you were describing certain things that I thought and hoped only existed in my mind. I have spent the last 2 years of my life trying to convince my therapist that little gray creatures had repeatedly visited me as a child, and on at least one occasion, while I was staying at a cabin in the woods with my parents, they brought me to their ship where other different-looking beings along with human beings, Earth people, did all kinds of crazy things including what I refer to, for lack of a better explanation, as splitting my mind. The closest description I could give to explain the above-stated term would be that I experienced something akin to induced psychosis. Note, this may be similar to what some abductees or contactees have referred to. It is a well-known phenomenon that when one undergoes heavy trauma their minds may create an alternate personality as a safeguard. The theory behind this is that the human brain is not so much divided into separate compartments as it is divided into separate individual brains. One of these backup minds seems to take over in those suffering from multiple personality syndrome. This splitting of the mind might conceivably be accomplished through a type of technosis. Some UFO and inner-Earth abductees claim that when they are in the other realm another consciousness other than their waking consciousness takes over. It has been referred to as their unconscious, subconscious, dream conscious, and so on. The ideas and motives of the waking and other consciousness may be different. For instance, the aliens, be they sauroid or human, may have convinced one personality to cooperate with them, whereas the waking conscious might not, and in fact the waking consciousness might even have no memory of events which had taken place while in the other consciousness, other than faint dream-like impressions. This is also evidenced by the fact that those suffering from multiple personality syndrome might do certain things or not do certain things depending on which trance-induced consciousness is dominant. Branton. This event occurred when I was 8, possibly 9 years old. While I have yet to undergo hypnosis, I have many memories which are very fragmented and blocked. Although the above-mentioned experience is perhaps the most traumatic, a lot of vivid images and details are somewhat clear. I have a distinct memory of being made to lay on a table and having what I thought was a 3-pronged fork stuck in my lower back right next to my spine and a smaller one stuck in the back of my, she skips a word here, intentionally or unintentionally, Branton, directly vertical to the one in my back. I have the scars, both of triangular-shaped patterns, to match the memory. I remember looking up at different colored lights that kept changing and feeling okay one minute and screaming in agony the next. I remember someone talking to me but I could not see them. I'm not sure how much of this is in sequence as I have not remembered it that way. I remember screaming because I really thought and felt like I was falling through a crack in the earth. Then some people came in and told me that I could stop screaming because it wasn't happening anymore. I remember awkward things, like a door opening when it wasn't supposed to and seeing human beings on the other side and someone saying "-t". or something close to that word. I remember a bunch of beings in some kind of outfits, and because I'm screaming so loudly, one of them takes off this headpiece like some kind of fire personnel wear, and I stop screaming because I see that it is a woman, but then I hear a man's voice yelling at her and making her put it back on her head. I remember a lot of screaming, but it did not do much good. At one point, after I had been on the table for a while with the forks plugged into my back, I also remember this voice I couldn't see saying the same things over and over and over again, and I remember repeating it back to him, most of which I cannot remember. The one I called the head doctor came in to check on me. I was very sick, maybe even drugged, and he now had on a shiny dark blue overalls with an insignia above his chest. The insignia consisted of an outline of a man or a being with a line down through the middle of it, and the left half of the figure was black or dark while the right side was light Brandon. I remember a whole set of separate interactions with the aliens, of playing with a strange-looking one I thought was a child, a so-called hybrid. Brandon, of being shown a dead squirrel and being asked to touch it, of being given information while looking into the eyes of one of the Greys. This information, what I can remember, appears to involve future events in my own life and also in the world, including what appears to be some sort of global disaster. I also remember one of the Greys asking something from me and I agreed to it. Whatever it is, I cannot remember. I remember meeting a Grey with orange-red eyes that had slits down the middle. And all the other Greys were afraid of this one. Perhaps the most disturbing thing I remember is of a group of 3 or so beings with long blue capes and faces I cannot remember, coming in twice to stick a peer up my nose. When I had this particular flashback several months ago, I swear to you I physically re-experienced what that felt like. I believe I may have one of those implants that you spoke about at your workshop. I have checked on the roof of my mouth and did see what looks like needle marks as you suggested during your talk. I have experienced some strange things going on with my body lately, and I find myself feeling compelled to do certain things, especially like going to certain locations. Most recently all the way to Arizona. I do not wish to continue living like I have been for the past 4 years. Note, she also explained that the controllers motivated her into studying Zen Buddhism at the age of 12, and at age 20 she had come to the point of advanced Zen meditation. Could this be an attempt on the part of the controllers to put her into a semi-trance state in which she could via the implant be all the easier influenced mentally? Many occult lodges attempt to get the initiate to surrender to certain spiritual entities by teaching them a form of meditation which involves blanking out the mind. As they say, nature hates a vacuum, and if a human surrenders control of their own mind and thoughts, something else will take control. Brandon. I have called all over the country and found support groups, but none in my area. I even asked Mr. Bud Hopkins if he would see me, but he became rather unenthusiastic when I insisted there were human beings in my memories. He does not believe there are humans involved / working with aliens. He promised to put me in touch with his people working in San Francisco, but as of yet, I have not heard from him. I don't mean to complain, but I guess I just wanted to convey my level of frustration. You mentioned in your talk a woman researcher in Hawaii, you did not say her name, who claims to have had success in locating and deactivating these various implants. You mentioned she had some kind of instrument available that could detect these things. I would greatly appreciate it if you could tell me how to get in touch with her. If you could send me her name and address or phone number, or the name and address of anybody you think might be able to help me at any level. If you know anyone in my area who works with people like me, I would also appreciate their name. S. You mentioned that in England they have extracted some implants. Do you know who and where? I feel as though I've been brainwashed and need to be deprogrammed, but I can't seem to convince anybody that any of this really happened. Well, I did convince one person. Unfortunately, he's an optometrist. Guess I find that to be really funny, but I'm not sure why. I am willing to go anywhere inside or outside of the country. I do not have a lot of money, but I do have some resources available to me. Unfortunately, this woman is not the only one in this desperate situation. Who out there has the compassion and the means to help these poor people? If you're out there, we encourage you to use your talents to help these victims and, if possible, aid them in removing the mind-manipulating implants which have been used by the aliens as thought control mechanisms used, no doubt, as part of their overall strategy of manipulation, subversion and infiltration of the human race. At this point we will return to the main theme of this file, the relatively benevolent human societies living and operating within the interior realms below the surface of the earth. Below Central Asia there is said to exist one of the largest and most ancient human subterranean societies in the world. All in all, this society, which has been referred to by many as Agartha or Agarthi, consists of humans, most of whom have no real enmity towards those on the surface, other than their desire to protect their world from intrusion from undesirables. Although, as in most other civilizations in the world, small groups of renegades may exist among them who may be tied into the Mabrebdalian scenario. But for the most part the inhabitants of this realm are believed to be relatively friendly. In fact, according to one source, this civilization was founded upon conflict with the serpent race or lizard beings, who were allegedly driven from those particular caverns when the ancestors of the present Agartians or some of the present inhabitants of Agarthi encountered them. This ancient war was believed to have taken place after their ancestors, who at one time lived on the surface, first discovered this ancient underground realm and the malevolent influences of the serpent races, which had for ages been manipulating the minds of people on the surface via witchcraft. Also, many of the cavern civilizations in the Western Hemisphere are believed to be allied with the Agartians, the Telosians of Mount Shasta being included as one of the North American subcolonies allegedly tied in with the Agarthi network. Perhaps the most complete descriptions of this underground realm come from the two travelers Ferdinand Ossendowski and Nicholas Roerich. To begin, we will quote from Ossendowski's writings as they appear in his book Beasts, Men and Gods, 1922. E. P. Dutton and Company, New York. Quoting from the chapter The Subterranean Kingdom, pages 300-311, we read, "On my journey into Central Asia I came to know for the first time about the mystery of mysteries, which I can call by no other name. At the outset I did not pay much attention to it and did not attach to it such importance as I afterwards realized belonged to it, when I had analyzed and connected many sporadic, hazy and often controversial bits of evidence. The old people on the shore of the river Amel related to me an ancient legend to the effect that a certain Mongolian tribe in their escape from the demands of Genghis Khan hid themselves in a subterranean country. Afterwards a Soyot from near the lake of Nogankul showed me the smoking gate that serves as the entrance to the kingdom of Agarthi. Through this gate a hunter formerly entered into the kingdom and, after his return, began to relate what he had seen there. The lamas cut out his tongue in order to prevent him from telling about the mystery of mysteries. When he arrived at old age, he came back to the entrance of this cave and disappeared into the subterranean kingdom, the memory of which had ornamented and lightened his nomad heart. The favorite Gelong Lama of Prince Chelton Bailey and the prince himself gave me an account of the subterranean kingdom. Everything in the world, said the Gelong, is constantly in a state of change and transition. Peoples, science, religions, laws and customs. How many great empires and brilliant cultures have perished? And that alone which remains unchanged is evil, the tool of bad spirits. More than 60,000 years ago a holy man disappeared with a whole tribe of people under the ground and never appeared again on the surface of the earth. Many people, however, have since visited this kingdom, Sakyamuni, under Gaghan, Paspa, Khan Baber and others. No one knows where this place is. One says Afghanistan, others India. All the people there are protected against evil and crimes to not exist within its bournes. Science is there developed calmly and nothing is threatened with destruction. The subterranean people have reached the highest knowledge. Note, the 60,000-year period is probably greatly exaggerated. According to an American monk by the name of Ernest Dickov, as described in his book Agartha, the human habitation of this realm was initiated no more than a few thousand years ago, after the deluge, when an Asian prince entered with an army of humans and fought with the reptilians who had taken possession of these caverns. Much activity and growth may have nonetheless taken place within such an uncontested civilization within the few thousand years since, according to Dickov, its human habitation. According to one source, over 20 million persons now reside in Agarthi, and many more on the surface accept its existence. It is said that an ancient library exists between the surface and Agarthi, in underground vaults to which certain Asian initiates have access. Below or beyond these vaults, the kingdom itself is said to exist. Branton. Prince Chelton Bailey added, this kingdom is Agarthi. It extends throughout all the subterranean passages of the whole world. I heard a learned Lama of China relating to Bogda Khan that all the subterranean caves of America are inhabited by the ancient people who have disappeared underground. Traces of them are still found on the surface of the land. These subterranean peoples in spaces are governed by rulers owing allegiance to the king of the world. Note, If the subterranea of America was once mostly inhabited by humans who migrated there from the surface or other parts of the inner world, then the fact of the modern-day infiltration of the saurian or serpent races into the underground of America must suggest that the major infestation occurred sometime within the last 2 or 3 centuries. The so-named king of the world is apparently a reference to the present leader of the Council of Agadi, which would probably make whoever held such a position the most influential man in the world, for good or evil. And in fact, according to former Dulce-based security worker Thomas C., certain of the United States presidents in the past have held conferences with these kings of Agadi. A succession of many such kings have allegedly reigned over this underground realm, most of them probably receiving more adoration than they deserve and have apparently been regarded as gods by some of the residents of the subterranean world. This would not necessarily be the fault of these kings, many of whom according to sources have acknowledged a higher potentate than themselves and allegedly even pray to Almighty God on behalf of humanity. Just like the popes of Rome or rulers and presidents of the surface nations, these Agarian kings possessed their own personalities, some being perhaps more suited to reign than others, but nevertheless should be respected as the elected representatives of perhaps tens of millions of persons who dwell within the inner world. The name of one such king, according to one source, was Rigdon-Jebo. Names of other Agarian rulers are unknown except, perhaps, to the inhabitants of Agadi itself. Branton. Prince Chelton, speaking to the author, continued. In underground caves there exists a peculiar light which affords growth to the grains and vegetables and long life without disease to the people. There are many different peoples and many different tribes. An old Buddhist Brahmin in Nepal was carrying out the will of the gods in making a visit to the ancient kingdom of Genghis-Siam, where he met a fisherman who ordered him to take a place in his boat and sail with him upon the sea. On the 3rd day they reached an island where he met a people having 2 tongues which could speak separately in different languages. They showed to him peculiar, unfamiliar animals, tortoises with 16 feet and 1 eye, huge snakes with a very tasty flesh and birds with teeth which caught fish for their masters in the sea. These people told him that they had come up out of the subterranean kingdom and described to him certain parts of the underground country. The Lama Turgut traveling with me from Urga to Peking gave me further details. The capital of Agadi is surrounded with towns of high priests and scientists. It reminds one of Lhasa, where the palace of the Dalai Lama, the Potala, is the top of a mountain covered with monasteries and temples. In cars strange and unknown to us they rush through the narrow cleavages inside our planet. Some Indian Brahmins and Tibetan Dalai Lamas during their laborious struggles to the peaks of mountains which no other human feet had trod have found their inscriptions on the rocks, footprints in the snow and tracks of wheels. The blissful Sakyamuni found on one mountain-top tablets of stone carrying words which he only understood in his old age and afterwards penetrated into the kingdom of Agadi, from which he brought back crumbs of the sacred learning preserved in his memory. Ferdinand remembered a particular conversation with one Lama. "How many persons have ever been to Agadi?" I questioned him. "Very many," answered the Lama, "but all these people have kept secret that which they saw there. When the Alays destroyed Lhasa, one of their detachments in the southwestern mountains penetrated to the outskirts of Agadi. Here they learned some of the lesser mysterious sciences and brought them to the surface of our earth. This is why the Alays and Kalmucks are artful sorcerers and prophets. Also from the eastern countries some tribes of black people penetrated to Agadi and lived there many centuries. Afterwards they were thrust out from the kingdom and returned to the earth, bringing with them the mystery of predictions according to cards, grasses and the lines of the palm. They are the Gypsies. Somewhere in the north of Asia a tribe exists which is now dying and which came from the cave of Agadi, skilled in calling back the so-called spirits of the dead as they float through the air. As is the case of many of the peoples inhabiting the surface of Central Asia, some of the underground peoples apparently are prone to practicing certain forms of occultism or spiritism. This might explain why some MIB have been described as Oriental-appearing humans who have demonstrated occult powers to those they have contacted. This, as we've said, might only consist of a relatively small percentage of the underground inhabitants of the Agarian network, a small percentage which might have, as is the case with almost every other nation, sold out to the reptilians in exchange for power over their fellow human beings. In his book Shambhala, 1930, Frederick A. Stokes Company, New York, writer and traveler Nicholas Roerich adds some additional insights into human habitation of underground regions of Central Asia. In his chapter Subterranean Dwellers, pages 210-219, we read the following words. Once on our travels we reached a half-ruined village. There was a glimmer of light in only 2 houses. In a small room, an old man sat cleaning a utensil. He became our host for the night. I asked him the reason for his isolation. He answered, "Everyone has departed. They have found more suitable sites for their dwellings. They were strong and enterprising. Something new attracted them. But I knew that nothing new exists on earth. And I did not wish to change the place of my death. Thus the strongest ones depart. The decaying ones patiently await death. Is this not the story of all migrations, of all enterprises? The subject of the great migrations is the most fascinating in the history of humanity. What spirit was it that thus moved whole nations and innumerable tribes? What cataclysm drove the hordes from their familiar steppes? What new happiness and privileges did they anticipate in the blue mist of the immense desert? On rocks in Dartistan we saw ancient drawings. We also saw the same kind of drawings upon the rocks near the Brahmaputra, as well as on the rocks of Orkhon in Mongolia, and in the tumuli of Minuzinsk in Siberia. And finally we discerned the same creative psychology in the Halrustningers of Sweden and Norway. And later we stopped in admiration before the mighty signs of the early Romanesque, which we found, based on the same creative aspirations of the great migrators. In every city, in every encampment of Asia, I tried to discover what memories were being cherished in the folk memory. Through these guarded and preserved tales you can recognize the reality of the past. In every spark of folklore, there is a drop of great truth adorned or distorted. Not long ago we were too vain to appreciate these treasures of folklore. What could these illiterate people know? But afterwards we learned that even the great Rigved days were written down only in the comparatively recent past, and perhaps for many centuries they were passed down by word of mouth. We thought that the flying carpet of fairy tales belonged only to the children, but we soon recognized that although each fantasy, in its own individual way, weaves a beautiful carpet ornamenting life, nevertheless the very carpet bears the footprints of great reality of the past. Among the innumerable legends and fairy tales of various countries may be found the tales of lost tribes and subterranean dwellers. In wide and diverse directions, people are speaking of the identical facts. But in correlating them you can readily see that these are but chapters from the one story. At first it seems impossible that there should exist any scientific connection between these distorted whispers under the light of the desert bonfires. But afterwards you begin to grasp the peculiar coincidence of these manifold legends related by peoples who are even ignorant of each other's names. You recognize the same relationship in the folklores of Tibet, Mongolia, China, Turkestan, Kashmir, Persia, Altai, Siberia, the Ural, Caucasia, the Russian steppes, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, Germany, France, from the highest mountains to the deepest oceans. You will hear wonderfully elaborated tales in the Turfan district. They tell you how the people, not willing to submit to the cruelty, close themselves in subterranean mountains. They even ask you if you want to see the entrance to the cave through which the saintly persecuted folk fled. In Kukr you will hear of King Pochan, ruler of the Tokars, and how, when the enemy approached, he disappeared with all the treasure of his kingdom, leaving only sand, stones and ruins behind him. Each entrance to a cave suggests that someone has already entered there. Every creek, especially the subterranean creeks, draw one's fantasy to the underground passages. In many places in Central Asia, they speak of the Agardi, the subterranean people. In numerous beautiful legends they outline the same story of how the best people abandoned the treacherous earth and sought salvation in hidden countries where they acquired new forces and conquered powerful energies. In the Altai Mountains, in the beautiful upland valley of Ayaman, a hoary old believer, Snarover, said to me, "I shall prove to you that the tale about the Chud, the subterranean people, is not a fantasy. I shall lead you to the entrance of the subterranean kingdom." On the way through the valley surrounded by snowy mountains, my host told us many tales about the Chud. It is remarkable that Chud in Russian has the same origin as the word wonder. So, perhaps, we may consider the Chud a wonderful tribe. My bearded guide told how, once upon a time, in this fertile valley lived and flourished the powerful tribe of Chud. They knew how to prospect for minerals and how to reap the best harvest. Most peaceful and most industrious was this tribe. But then came a white Tsar with innumerable hordes of cruel warriors. The peaceful, industrious Chud could not resist the assaults of the conquerors, and not wishing to lose their liberty, they remained as serfs to the white Tsar. Then, for the first time, a white birch began to grow in this region. And, according to old prophecies, the Chud knew that it was the time for their departure. And the Chud, unwilling to remain subject to the white Tsar, departed onto the earth. Only sometimes can you hear the holy people singing. Now their bells ring out in the subterranean temples. But there shall come the glorious time of human purification, and in those days, the great Chud shall again appear in full glory. Thus the old believer concluded. We approached some low stony hill. Proudly he showed me, here we are. Here is the entrance to the great subterranean kingdom. When the Chud entered the subterranean passage they closed the entrance with stones. Now we stand just beside this holy entrance. We stood before a huge tomb encircled by great stones, so typical of the period of the great migrations. Such tombs, with the beautiful remains of Gothic relics, we saw in South Russian steppes, in foothills of the northern Caucasus. Studying this hill, I remembered how during our crossing of the Karakoram Pass, my size, the Ladakhi, asked me, "Do you know that in the subterranean caves here many treasures are hidden and that in them lives a wonderful tribe which abhors the sins of earth?" And again when we approached Cotton the hoofs of our horses sounded hollow as though we rode above caves or wallows. Our caravan people called attention to this, saying, "Do you hear what hollow subterranean passages we are crossing?" Through these passages, people who are familiar with them can reach far-off countries. When we saw entrances to caves, our caravaneers told us, long ago people lived there. Now they have gone inside. They have found a subterranean passage to the subterranean kingdom. Only rarely do some of them appear again on the earth. At our bazaar such people come with strange, very ancient money, but nobody could ever remember a time when such money was in usage here. I asked them if we could also see such people. And they answered, single quote, "Why yes, if your thoughts are similarly high and in contact with these holy people, because only sinners are upon the earth and the pure and courageous people pass on to something more beautiful. Great is the belief in the kingdom of the subterranean people. Through all of Asia, through the spaces of all deserts, from the Pacific to the Urals, you can hear the same wondrous tale of the vanished holy people. And even far beyond the Ural Mountains, the echo of the same tale will reach you. Often you hear about subterranean tribes. Sometimes an invisible holy people is said to be living behind a mountain. Sometimes either poisonous or vitalizing gases are spread over the earth, to protect someone. Sometimes you hear how the sands of the great desert shift, and for a moment disclose treasures at the entrances of subterranean kingdoms. But none would dare to touch those treasures. You will hear how, in the rocks, in the most deserted mountain ranges, you can see openings which connect with these subterranean passes, and how beautiful princesses once upon a time occupied these natural castles. From distances one might take these openings for Uris, because all which belongs to the subterranean people is concealed. Sometimes the holy city is submerged, as in the folklore of Netherlands and Switzerland. And there is folklore that coincides with actual discoveries in the lakes and along the sea coasts. In Siberia, in Russia, Lithuania and Poland, you find many legends and fairy tales about giants who lived at times in these countries but afterwards, disliking the new customs, disappeared. In these legends, one may recognize the specific foundations of the ancient clans. The giants are brothers. Very often the sisters of the giants live on the other shores of the lakes or the other side of the mountains. Very often they do not like to move from the site, but some special event drives them from their patrimonial dwelling. Birds and animals are always near these giants. As witnesses they follow them and announce their departure. The endless kurgans of the southern steppes retain around them numerous stories about the appearance of the unknown warrior, nobody knows from whence. The Carpathian Mountains in Hungary have many similar stories of unknown tribes, giant warriors and mysterious cities. If, without prejudice, you patiently point out on your map all the legends and stories of this nature you will be astonished at the result. When you collect all the fairy tales of lost and subterranean tribes, will you not have before you a full map of the migrations? During the Subterranean World controversy, which filled the pages of Amazing Stories magazine in the late 1940s as a result of the writings of Palmer, Shaver and numerous readers who sent in their own contributions, a couple by the name of John and Dorothy D. Kirky became involved as well. They had sent in a fictionalized novelette based loosely on the Agharti legends, which was published in the magazine. Sometimes afterwards, in the December 1946 issue of As p. 173, they submitted another letter describing a strange response to their story. Sirs, The most singular thing has happened and we are at a loss to offer an explanation. It might be a prank, but unless someone is willing to spend a good deal of money on a prank, it must be the truth. On July 29th, a tall man wearing a long blue or black overcoat and a dark hat drawn down to conceal his face, went to a former residence of ours in San Francisco asking for us. He was told we had moved and the landlord tried to find a card bearing our forwarding address. Try as he might, he couldn't, nor could he remember even the city, but he said he thought it was Portland. When told, the man answered, "I quite understand. If you find the address, kindly write them and say, the man from Agarty seeks them." On August 5th he reappeared in Portland at an apartment house where we had once lived. Again our address was missing and again he left the same message, adding, "I bear a message for them from the king." In both cases, after we had gone, our forwarding addresses were found and both landlords wrote to us immediately apologizing for their oversight. They said he impressed them so much they couldn't forget him. Both of them misspelled Agarty in their letters. Who is the king? Can't he be referring to the fabulous king of the world? The only solution we can suggest is to publish this letter with our address and hope that this time the man from Agarty, if he be such, will find us. John and Dorothy D. Kirky, 665 SW 113th Place, Seattle 66, Washington. As further evidence that not all subterranean societies are of the insidious, reptilian or reptilian-controlled variety, we add the following revelations from Commander X single quote, "The mysterious anonymous the United States intelligence official who has revealed much about inside government knowledge of alien civilization both beyond and beneath the earth." He is the author of the book Underground Alien Bases, published by Tim Beckley's UFO Review Abelard Press, New York. Mr. X was apparently very familiar with the subterranean world controversies that surrounded Amazing Stories and related publications in the early years, which may explain his present position in the United States intelligence. He reveals the following subterranea-related accounts from South America. Of all the countries on the face of the earth, none is more mysterious, or less explored, than is Brazil. Miles upon miles of this country have never been set foot upon by white man. In these areas live whole tribes of savage Indians whose civilizations are said to be akin to those existing at the time of the Stone Age. Many of those who have dared venturing into these pockets of unexplored jungle have never come out. Perhaps the case of Colonel Fawcett will be familiar to readers as an example of what I mean. He supposedly was captured by a tribe of wild Indians while in search of a hidden city said to be located in the confines of the dense jungle. Before his death, Dr. Raymond Bernard had sent this writer many personal letters regarding his findings related to underground civilization. We quote from these communications in the following. I arrived in Brazil in 1956 and have been carrying on my research since I met a theosophical leader who told me about the subterranean cities that exist in Brazil. He referred to Professor Henrique de Souza, president of the Brazilian Theosophical Society, at São Lourenço in the state of Minas Gerais, who erected a temple dedicated to Agartha, which is the Buddhist name of the subterranean world. Here in Brazil live theosophists from all parts of the world, all of whom believe in the existence of the subterranean cities. Professor de Souza told me that the great English explorer Colonel Fawcett is still alive, living in a subterranean city in the Roncato Mountains of Mato Grosso, where he found the subterranean city of Atlantines for which he searched. Note, Bernard refers to the inhabitants of this city as Atlantines, when in fact other accounts suggest that like the underground cities below the east coast of North America, many of these cavern cities were originally constructed by an ancient antediluvian race, which might have been very similar to the lost race spoken of in the Atlantis legendary, and were later re-inhabited after the flood. In this sense they might be referred to as Atlantines, although the present inhabitants of such cities probably do not have any direct genetic ties to the antediluvian Atlantines. Branton, but is held prisoner lest he reveal the secret of his whereabouts. He was not killed by Indians as is commonly believed. Professor de Souza claimed he has visited subterranean cities, including Shambhala, the world capital of the subterranean empire of Agartha. I then went to Mato Grosso to find the subterranean city where Fawcett is claimed to be living with his son Jack, but failed to do so. I then returned to Joinville in the state of Santa Catarina, and there continued my research. Just recently 2 explorers returned from entering a tunnel near Ponte Grossa in the state of Paraná. One of them had recently entered alone and spent 5 days in the underworld city there. It had about 50 inhabitants plus children. The fruit orchards were recently planted, and the inhabitants received fruit from another subterranean city. During the last visit, the two explorers were met at the entrance of the tunnel by a guardian and the chief of the city, who told them that they should return in 2 years when the fruit trees will start to bear, but cannot enter now. The same two explorers entered a tunnel in Rincan, state of Parana, and finally came to a chimney-like structure with 4 chains hanging down. They descended on the chains, but when they came near the bottom a gas with a chemical odor started to come up and forced them to ascend. Obviously the subterranean dwellers tried to keep them from reaching the city. This seems often to be the case, Commander X. Our explorer J.D. name on file, Commander X, who is a mountain guide of the Mystery Mountain near Joinville where there is supposed to be an entrance, said that, several times, he saw a luminous flying saucer ascend from the tunnel opening that leads to a subterranean city inside the mountain, in which he heard the beautiful choral singing of men and women, and also heard the canto gallo rooster crowing, a universal symbol indicating the existence of subterranean cities in Brazil. He said that the saucer was so luminous that it lit up the night sky and converted it into daylight. On one occasion he met a group of subterranean men outside the tunnel. They were short, stocky, with reddish beards and long hair, and very muscular. When he tried to approach them, they vanished. Often he saw strange illuminations in this area at night which were probably produced by flying saucers. We use the name Mystery Mountain, rather than reveal the true name of the mountain, so that unwanted outsiders will not come here to locate it. Throughout my many years of research I have accumulated a vast amount of data which would indicate that these entrances to subterranean cities abound throughout the region. An elderly man living in Joinville once told me that he had visited a tunnel near Concepao in the state of Sao Paulo, and saw in the distance a marvelous subterranean city with vehicles darting back and forth, evidently traveling through tunnels from one subterranean city to another. Although the following report requires confirmation, it was told to me by an explorer named North Carolina who said that he had visited a tunnel near Rio Castor and had met a beautiful young woman appearing to be about 20 years of age. She spoke to him in Portuguese and said that she was 2,500 years old. He also met a bearded subterranean man. Note, often humans encountered in aerial discs or subterranean caverns declare that they are extremely old by human standards. On the surface this might sound next to impossible, unless a revolutionary scientific breakthrough on the part of these human aliens has allowed them to retard the aging process to an extreme degree, or could the possibility that they are separated from the degenerating radiations of solar rays explain their allegedly greater longevity? Another possibility would be that through bionic/biological transplants/prosthetics, etc. the lifespan of human beings possessing advanced biological and technological sciences might theoretically be increased dramatically. Incidentally, the writer and traveler Robert Stacy Judd in some of his books described an exploration he and others in his party made of the peripheral areas of the Lolton Caves of Yucatan. Legend says that at least one group of people, fleeing persecution, entered en masse into the massive Lolton Caves and were never seen again. Stacy Judd tells of his own encounter with a cave hermit deep in the cavern chambers who claimed to be well over 1,000 years old, and who said he was a guardian of the cave and of the treasures and city, which lay deep below in the unknown depths, unknown, that is, except to the strange hermit. Aside from photographs of this hermit which appeared in some of his works, the author also revealed photographs of underground gardens consisting of areas of the cave which contained small patches of jungle, watered and lit through parts of the cavern ceilings which had collapsed, exposing them to the outer world. Whether such claims of longevity are real or whether the subterranean people were just playing with the minds of such explorers who encountered them, is uncertain. Branton. Still another explorer named Du visited this same tunnel near Gaspar, Santa Catarina, and behind a wonderful fruit orchard saw a subterranean woman with a child in her arms reading to it aloud from a huge book written in an unknown language. After she read each sentence the child repeated the same and in this way was taught how to read. All of these subterranean cities are illuminated by strange light. In relation to the apparent connection between subterranean civilizations and unidentified flying objects, Bernard and de Souza, incidentally, believed flying saucers to be of subterranean origin. We will here quote from Paris Flamand, author of The Age of Flying Saucers, Hawthorne Books, Incorporated, New York, who tends to confirm this hypothesis. He in turn quoted Raymond A. Palmer as a major proponent of this belief. The new decade was not without a new theory, or, at least, a variation of an old one that not only were flying saucers not originating from beyond the farthest reaches of our planet, they were expelled from within it. Ray Palmer wrote a lengthy article elaborating his interesting and imaginative thesis, and prefaced it with the assertion that he was prepared to prove that flying saucers are native to planet Earth. That the governments of more than one nation, if not all of them, know this to be the fact. That a concerted effort is being made to learn all about them, and to explore their native land. And that facts already known are considered so important that they are the world's top secret. The continuation of his contention reads: Is there any area on Earth which can be regarded as a possible origin for flying saucers? There are 4. The two major, in order of importance, are Antarctica and the Arctic. The two minor areas are South America's Mato Grosso and Asia's Tibetan Highlands. Raymond Bernard, actual name Walter Sagmeister, writing in the October 1959 issue of Search magazine, p. 48, described yet another alleged encounter with a subterranean race. What are we to make of all these stories? Are we to assume that some of the individuals who told Bernard such accounts actually made them up, as some suggest, in order to receive the reward Bernard was known to offer undocumentable accounts of ancient tunnels? Or, are we to accept these accounts for just what their sources claim them to be, actual encounters with the subterranean world? Bernard stated the following. Last week my investigators returned and said they visited their city, that is the city of a race of dwarf humans, whom Bernard referred to as the Nibelungs, who live in a subterranean region with its own system of illumination, Branton, and are able to bring any of my American friends to visit it, but I require one condition, absolute secrecy, as I don't want governments to send armies into the tunnel to disturb these peaceful people. To reach them requires a 3-day journey of about 40 miles through a tunnel. This entire distance is through a tunnel carefully lined with cut stone blocks below, above and on the sides. That was quite an engineering feat. I think the tunnel was made long to keep out curiosity seekers, and only the most determined will travel the distance. Here is the report of my investigations. They are two ranchers, father and son, who discovered the tunnel accidentally. We left our house 5 a.m. for the tunnel on top of a mountain and reached at 3 p.m. We were tired and camped near the entrance of the tunnel. For 3 days we proceeded through the tunnel. We told time by our watches, as we could not tell when it was day or night. We went to sleep at 10 p.m. and awoke at 3 a.m. and continued working. By the third day the tunnel started to go downward by steps. It was built of stone blocks on all sides. By the night of the third day the tunnel suddenly opened into a great space covered with what appeared as a sky with a yellow light that made everything luminous, like daylight. We saw a city with many houses and saw many people in the distance. They were dwarfs with long white beards and long hair, and we saw women and children, and heard them crying. The third member of our party got frightened, so we had to return. These men found 3 such tunnels. They entered another for 3 days, but after hearing voices furthering, got scared and returned. Now they're entering the third. In his book The Under People, 1969. Award Books. New York, author Eric Norman relates an interesting account of the possible fate of the Inca Indians. In Chapter 2, Strange Caverns and Terrifying Tunnels, he relates, conquest in South America was natives hacked to death by Spanish swords, arrogant priests absolving conquistadors for their murderous atrocities, sharp Toledo steel lances running through children and, pervading it all, a dark lust for native gold. In the autumn of 1582, Francisco Pizarro hid his 168 Spanish horse soldiers behind the doorways and walls of the Incan town of Cajamarca. Atahalpa, the absolute emperor of the sun-worshipping Inca's empire, had agreed to meet Pizarro in the village plaza. Atahalpa's procession entered the village with a flare of pageantry. Incan warriors and the emperor's litter-bearers were dressed in the finest cloth. The royal guard were armed with spiked helmets, feathered war clubs, poison-tipped lances and dazzling gold-inlaid swords. Thick gold bracelets encircled their bronze wrists, and rich silver discs dangled from their pierced earlobes. Pizarro and his conquistadors remained hidden behind their guns and cannons as Atahalpa and his entourage entered the main plaza. "It is like leading hogs to the killing pen," Pizarro sneered. The bandy-legged Spaniard knew hogs. Prior to his service for Spain's king, Pizarro had been a swineherd in the province of Estremadura. He lived by a harsh personal code that equated kindness with weakness. Deceit was the trick of a clever man, and lying, duplicity and thievery were proper. Atahalpa's group stirred nervously when they found no sign of the visitors to their land. Spanish fingers twitched on gun triggers and a hawk-faced soldier stood ready to torch the cannon. Suddenly, a solitary figure left the building and walked into the plaza. He was dressed in the faded robe of a Dominican friar. His bald head glistened contemptuously toward the Incan emperor. Friar Vicente Valverde announced that all of South America now belonged to the King of Spain. He stared coldly at the emperor and snapped, "The papal bull of 1493 provides this right." Proud and regal, Atahalpa glared at the haughty friar before him. "Your pope must be crazy to give away land that does not belong to him," he said. The friar was stunned momentarily, then he turned and ran toward the safety of a building, shouting, "Pizarro, attack, attack. Kill all of them. I will absolve you." With hoarse cries of Santiago, the Spaniards slaughtered the unsuspecting Inca warriors. In a few minutes the battle was over. The emperor's royal guard was dead, or dying, in the blood-stained dust of the plaza, and Atahalpa was a prisoner of Pizarro. Greedy Spanish hands ripped the emerald necklace from his body. A wild gleam entered Pizarro's eyes when the emperor handed over his exquisitely carved bracelets of thick gold. "I want my freedom," Atahalpa informed Pizarro. "I will fill this room with gold for ransom." The room was 17 feet wide and 22 feet long. The emperor's subjects delivered $8,443,456 in gold to Pizarro and, afterward, Pizarro and Friar Vicente Valverde condemned Atahalpa to be burned alive at the stake. While the Spaniards were burning the emperor, a packed train of 11,000 llamas was headed toward the Spanish encampment. Each beast was burdened by a heavy load of gold. Native messengers brought news of the Inca king's death, and the fantastic caravan disappeared. During the past centuries, thousands of gold-greedy adventurers have searched for the loot of the 11,000 llamas. None has discovered a single clue to the treasure's site. Believers in the Underpeople theory are firm in their contention that the Incan llamas disappeared into a gigantic tunnel that led to the inner earth kingdoms. Even the population figures show that these conquered people outwitted their bestial conquerors, according to one South American researcher. Incan census figures reveal that there was 10 million subjects when the Spaniards arrived. 40 years later, in 1571, the Spaniards took a census. There was approximately 1 million Indians. I admit that the Spanish method of slave labor took a tremendous toll. But could 9 million Incas have died in Spanish mines? Eric Norman relates the words of one correspondent who described the ancient subterranean tunnels believed by many to exist beneath the Andes. "At first I scoffed at such stories about mysterious tunnels and an alien civilization beneath the surface. I joined an inner earth group for the simple enjoyment of discussing outlandish ideas in a humorless, serious manner. Gradually, I became interested by the considerable volume of circumstantial evidence. I now believe the Earth is absolutely honeycombed by a web of tunnels that run beneath the continents, under the oceans, and these passageways link the subterranean cities of the inner world. There are many reports concerning a vast tunnel called the Rodway of the Incas, which has an entrance somewhere in Peru. It runs south more than 1,000 miles. There is another entrance to this fabulous tunnel in the desert of Atacama in Chile. The Highway of the Incas passes under Cusco, the legendary city of Peru. There is another, smaller, but very well-hidden entrance to the tunnel in the mountains near Machu Picchu, which is the capital city of the first and last Inca emperor. It is called the Lost City of the Incas and was not discovered until 1911 by an American, Hiram Brigham. It is considered the eighth wonder of the world. Everything at Machu Picchu is in excellent preservation. There are more than 200 buildings constructed from white granite. Fountains, shrines, and gigantic stairwells carved from a single massive boulder. This was a thriving city. It is intact except for the thatched roofs of the houses having deteriorated over the centuries. And, the doors are missing. It is as if the inhabitants selected a single day and mysteriously vanished. Did they enter the Highway of the Incas and migrate to the inner earth? Was this correspondent brainwashed by his colleagues to believe in the subterranean world? Or, was he a skeptical man who changed his mind in the face of a tremendous amount of information? His mention of the Highway of the Incas strikes a familiar note. A physician in Argentina has devoted his spare time to an investigation of this legendary intercontinental tunnel of the Underpeople. He commented, "I have always been intrigued by the unknown, and please convey my thanks to Dr. H. for providing the opportunity to publish my views. I started to investigate the Highway of the Incas when I was a young, curious youth, and I have hundreds of witnessed, notarized statements. These documents and tape recordings fill one room of my home. The Incas knew of the tunnel and, although gold was of little value to them, they hid their treasures in these caverns to keep it from the greedy Spanish conquerors. No one had provided a satisfactory explanation for their mysterious disappearance. There was an empire of several million people that vanished from the surface of the earth. They entered the tunnel and left the Cuicua Indians behind. As few Incas have been seen since then, they possibly took up residence in the cavern city or followed the tunnel to the interior of the earth. The highway is the largest of the tunnels and it connects all continents. In addition to the openings in South America, there are entrances in Canada, in British Columbia. In America, you should investigate Mount Shasta in California and Mount St. Helena in Oregon. The tunnel is connected with Tibet and another opening in Central Asia. I believe the African entrance is in the Atlas Mountains in the north of that continent. I also suggest that you explore the highways which have been found in the oceans. These ancient underworld civilizations may be mining our seas. In previous files we referred to the alleged inhabitants of a subterranean city below Mount Shasta in California, which is believed to be one of the largest, if not the largest, subterranean community in North America, and which allegedly has ties with the Asian empire of Agartha and the South American subterranean colonies. The following are some excerpts from an article written by William Ferguson Hamilton, whose other publications can be obtained via 7327 Bothwell Road, Reseda, California 91335, who we have mentioned in earlier writings. Bill Hamilton has been in data processing for 22 years and is now a senior programmer analyst. He is a writer, investigator and researcher. He has been involved in UFO research and investigations since 1953. Bill is a past member of the Foundation for Research in Parapsychology, the Spacecraft Research Foundation, the World Federation of Science and Engineering, Mensa, the Hayek Society. He has been a member of Understanding, Incorporated, and served on its board. He founded Nexus and Nexus News, an info center for alternative energy and alternative lifestyles. He founded the Forum, a monthly forum on the UFO phenomena. He is a UFO investigator with Muffin, an associate director of UFOCHI, and founder of UFORCES. Bill is the author of the following books: Center of the Cortex, Telos, the Cosmic Computer, Geometry of the Grid, Close Encounter Report, Alien Magic Cosmic Top Secret. He has written numerous articles for publications such as Search, Energy Unlimited, New Age Science, The New Atlantine Journal, California UFO, and UFO Universe. The following article originally appeared in the New Atlantine Journal. I run across some fascinating people in the course of my investigations who tell me many unusual stories. While on the trail of reports of UFO-based locations, I met a young, very pretty blonde girl with almond-shaped eyes and small perfect teeth, whose name is Bonnie. Bonnie has told me an incredible story and has related a volume of interesting information. Bonnie is sincere, cheerful, and rational and says she was born in 1951 in a city called Telos that was built inside an artificial dome-shaped cavern in the earth a mile or so beneath Mount Shasta, California. Bonnie, her mother Ranamu, her father Mu, her sister Judy, her cousins Lori and Matox, live and move in our society, returning frequently to Telos for rest and recuperation. Bonnie relates that her people use boring machines to bore tunnels in the earth. These boring machines heat the rock to incandescence, then vitrify it, thus eliminating the need for beams and supports. A tube transit tunnel is used to connect the cities that exist in various subterranean regions in our hemisphere. The tube trains are propelled by electromagnetic impulses up to speeds of 2,500 miles per hour. One tube connects with one of their cities in the Mato Grosso jungle of Brazil. They have developed space travel and some flying saucers come from their subterranean bases. They grow food hydroponically under full-spectrum lights with their gardens attended by automatons. The food and resources of Telos are distributed in plenty to the 1.5 million population that thrives on a no-money economy. Bonnie talks about history, of the Ayers, Nagamayas, and Quetzals, of which she is a descendant. Note: many people have mistakenly identified the inhabitants of Telos as being directly descended from the Lemurians. However, Bonnie here seems to refute this by indicating that her ancestry was other than this, possibly Mesoamerican and or East Indian. As in the case of the ancient antediluvian cities of the eastern seaboard, which were re-established after being abandoned by the lost Atlantines, the Lemurians, if they existed, also seem to have been devastated in a worldwide cataclysm, and their cities re-established by the Ayers, Nagamayas, and Quetzals, and probably scattered members of other societies. As we've said earlier, the name Telos is a Grecian word meaning uttermost, suggesting a possible connection with the Grecian-like Havmasufs of the Panamint Mountains of California, Branton. I met Bonnie's cousin, Matox, who, like her, is a strict vegetarian and holds the same attitudes concerning the motives of government. They constantly guard against discovery or intrusion. Their advanced awareness in technology helps them remain vigilant. Science fiction? Bonnie is a real person. Many have met her. Is she perpetrating a hoax? For what motive? She does not seek publicity, and I have a devil of a time getting her to meetings to talk with others, but she has done so. There has been little variation in her story and her answers in the past 3 years. She has given me excellent technical insight on the construction of a crystal powered generator that extracts ambient energy. Bonnie's father, the Ramu, is 300 years old and a member of the ruling council of Telos. Many tunnels are unsafe and closed off. All tube transit tunnels are protected and are designed to eject uninvited guests. Does Bonnie have the answers that we are looking for? I don't know. Bonnie says she would like to satisfy our need for proof and will work with me on a satisfactory answer to that problem, but she is unconcerned with whether people accept her or not. Bonnie is humorous and easygoing and well-poised, yet sometimes she becomes brooding and mysterious. She says her people are busy planning survival centers for refugees. One of these is to be near Prescott, Arizona. Note, or rather below the Groom Creek area just south of Prescott, to be exact. Another survival center for refugees of the worldwide cataclysms, which the Telosians believe will eventually devastate the surface of the earth, is said to be below the general area of Jenny Lake, Wyoming, near the Tetons. The Tetons themselves have been the alleged home of a mysterious race. According to different sources, and extremely ancient stone buildings have reportedly been found high atop these peaks, Branton. When Bill Hamilton asked Bonnie to elaborate about the power sources which her people utilized to propel the so-called flying saucer craft, she replied, "A lot of it is crystals, that is crystal-induced electromagnetism. Branton, particularly the atmospheric vehicles. The planet-to-planet vehicles are driven by an iron mercury engine. Spaceships can reach speeds way beyond light. They can enter hyperspace. You generate into the fourth dimension. This is controlled by an onboard computer that takes you into and out of hyperspace. I know this is a simplification. When you're on a ship going into hyperspace, you will hear this vibration, and a loud screaming sound when you enter, then you will hear nothing." Bill concludes, "I have had many correlations on this data and am researching it further toward a comprehensive theory of space travel." The account given below appeared in Inner Light magazine, summer, 1991. Written by Antara, the article, entitled, "Introducing the Woman from Telos, the City Beneath Mount Shasta," is an alleged interview with this same resident of a subterranean city now living and working on the surface, under the name of Bonnie or Sharula, along with her husband, Shield. We quote portions of the interview as follows. The following interview with Sharula took place on July 23, 1990, and is reprinted from Insights for Positive Living. She shares with us some wonderful information about the Atlantean and Lemurian cities, that is, cities originally built by antediluvian Atlanteans and Lemurians, Branton, that exist beneath the Earth's surface. She speaks of her home, Telos, a city built a mile or so beneath Mount Shasta, California. During a recent trip to Mount Shasta, I encountered several local townspeople who have personally seen mysterious fires and lights on the slopes of Mount Shasta, and have heard otherworldly chants and music late at night, emanating from the mountain. And of course, there have been sightings of mysterious robed people walking into the side of the mountain. Even the local visitor's guide mentions the Lemurian connection to Mount Shasta. This interview may really stretch your perceptions of reality. I hope it does. It's meant to. Insights. Let's start off with some basic questions of who you are and where you come from. Sharula. My name is Sharula, and I come from a city underneath Mount Shasta, called Telos. This city was constructed at the termination of the Lemurian continent. When the scientists and priests of Lemuria realized the continent was about to sink, they petitioned a group called the Agartha Network, which controlled all the subterranean cities, to build our own city underneath Mount Shasta. There was an original set of caves there. We chose to enlarge these caverns to make them bigger and more livable. Note, although most accounts seem to suggest that Atlantis was destroyed in a cataclysm equivalent to a universal flood or deluge such as is described in the traditions of several races as well as in the writings of the Greek Plato. Lemuria may be a different story. Lemuria seems to be the name that surface humans have attributed to this alleged lost continent of the Pacific, but whether it was actually named that by the ancient inhabitants is uncertain. The major area of confusion seems to be whether Lemuria, or Mu, was an antediluvian or post-diluvian society like Agartha. James Churchward seems to place Mu somewhere in the Indian Ocean, whereas others place it in the Pacific. Some of the old Indian tribes of the Northeast and the California area have ancient legends of an island continent called Lemmu, which was said to be connected to ancient California or separate from it, out in the Pacific Ocean. Could the Hawaiian Islands be remnants of such an island continent? The Native American legends of California seem to place Mu shortly after the deluge, which was believed to have occurred a few thousand years before Christ or 5,000 years previous to the close of the 20th century. The exact history of the Telosians still needs to be investigated, even with the present information available, as it seems to be a complex history possibly involving several races, the Ayers, Nagamayas, Quetzals, Lemurians or Movians, Agartians, and possibly Greeks, East Indians, and others. Branton. Insights. How many people live in Telos? Sharula, 1.5 million. Insights. Tell us about your ecosystem. Your water, food, air, environment. What is it like to live in Telos? Sharula. We have perpetual light through a process of energizing stones to create full-spectrum lighting. We process them with the forces that make them small suns. The 5 levels are garden levels, where we produce all the food we need with hydroponic gardens. There are plants on all 5 levels that continue to circulate the air. We work off the same system the Earth does. The plants produce oxygen that is a subterranean biosphere. Branton. Plus, we have air shafts that come through the surface that sends air. Since that air is polluted, we use them less and less. Note, several years ago a man wrote into Search magazine stating that he was an Incan descendant who was searching for his own people, as he was convinced that they had escaped en masse into underground cities via ancient tunnels which they knew of, when the conquistadors invaded their land. He claimed that one day while by a river in a certain region near Mato Grosso, Brazil, he thought he heard a voice shouting from the top of a mountain. He began to climb the peak and a few hours later found himself beside a mountain-top shaft. He later managed to descend the shaft and discovered a tunnel which led horizontally to a point where a type of door existed. He heard what sounded like an elevator coming up from deep below, and a well-built man who claimed to be part Incan appeared and introduced himself through a transparent screen. He was told that anyone entering this particular subterranean region had to undergo a physical purification process to remove the radioactive poisons from their bodies, which were resident in the atmosphere of the outer world. Could this explain why the lifespan of some of the under people has reportedly increased dramatically? The Old Testament Torah states that previous to the deluge a transparent canopy of water vapor permeated the upper atmosphere, and some suggest that before this canopy fell in the form of the deluge the lifespan of the antediluvians was dramatically increased because this canopy sealed out most of the harmful and degenerating radiations of the sun. They suggest that this was why the antediluvians lived to an average of 500 years of age, while some like Methuselah lived upwards of 900 years. It appears as if the Telosians have taken precautions not only from the atmospheric solar radioactive pollution resulting from a decaying atmospheric shield, as is evidenced by an increase in skin cancer worldwide, etc., but also from the man-made radioactive and industrial pollutants. Branton, Insights. What form of government do you have? Sharula. We have a system where the government is run by the Council of 12 plus 1. They are 12 masters, 6 male and 6 female. If anyone has a disagreement, they go to an arbitrator, rather than fight it out among themselves. All arbitrators report to the council and they change constantly. They are appointed to that position based on their natural affinity for it. Insights. Who appoints them to that position? Sharula. The Temple of Melchizedek. All through the cosmos, that is human colonizers and explorers sent out from the earth since the deluge. Branton. There is an order called Melchizedek. At this point we will, before continuing with the Sharula interview, deal with the history of Melchizedek, which began on earth in ancient times. Melchizedek was the ancient high priest of Salem, now Jerusalem. We believe that this subject is important enough to deserve a fairly extensive explanation. There are basically two divergent views concerning the priesthood of Melchizedek. The first is held by the various ancient and neo-Masonic religions, which basically state that there are numerous members of the order who have been initiated into the priesthood through a process of religious devotion, etc., while the other view is held by the various groups of Judeo-Christian believers who claim that there is only one Melchizedek priest, the God-man Jesus, and since only one high priest was allowed to serve before Almighty God at any one time in ancient Israel to be replaced by another when he had passed on, these claim that since Jesus ascended from the grave and now lives forever without the possibility of ever dying, this singular priesthood will be his alone eternally. Both sides no doubt sincerely believe that they have the truth, but, of course, both cannot be correct. Many believe that the ancient Melchizedek was none other than the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, or was in essence a theophany or an Old Testament appearance of Jesus Jehovah. They make the following connections and similarities between Melchizedek and Jesus as evidence of their beliefs. Characteristics of Melchizedek. Characteristics of Jesus Christ. Melchizedek, king of Salem. Unto us a child is born. And, General 14:18, the Hebrew word his name shall be called. The for Salem is Shalom, which Prince of Peace. Isaiah 9:6 literally means, peaceful. When they heard that Shalom, an early name for Jesus, was coming to Jerusalem, us, Salem, from Strong's, they cried, Hosanna, blessed concordance is the King of Israel. Or, King of Peace, King of Salem, John 12:12-13. And Melchizedek brought. Jesus took bread, and forth bread and wine, that is blessed, and broke it. And he the fruit of the vine, or that took the cup, and gave it fruit of the grape. Genesis unto them. Mark 14:22-23 14:18. Melchizedek was the priest. Seeing then that we have of the Most High God, great high priest, that is Genesis 14:18 ascended unto the heavens, Jesus, Melchizedek, abideth the, Hebrews 4:14 priest continually. Hebrews, but into the second went 7:1-3 the high priest alone once. And they truly were many every year. But Christ being priest, because they were not common high priest, by his suffered to continue by own blood he entered in one son of death. Hebrews into the holy place, having 7:23 obtained eternal redemption for us. Hebrews 9:7-11-12 But this man, Jesus, because he continueth ever, hath an unchangeable priesthood. Hebrews 7:24. Melchizedek, to whom also and all the tithe of the land Abraham gave a tenth part of, is the Lord's, it is holy all. That is tithes, Hebrews unto the Lord. The tenth 7:1-2 also see, Genesis 14, shall be holy unto the Lord. 18-20, Leviticus 27:30-32 Jesus Christ is Lord. Philippians 2:11. Melchizedek, king of right in those days. I will cause righteousness. Hebrews 7:1-2 the branch of righteousness to grow up unto David, and he shall execute judgment in the land. Jeremiah 33:15. Melchizedek, having neither I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning of days, nor end of beginning and the ending, the life. Hebrews 7:1-3 Almighty, the first and the last. I am he that liveth, and was dead. And, behold, I am alive for evermore. Rev. Latin 1:8-11-18. We continue now with the interview with Sharula. Insights. Earlier, you mentioned you had to petition the Agartha, the ones in charge of the inner earth cities. Are there other cities in existence? Sharula. Oh, yes. There are many. There are over 100 inner earth cities. Some of them are very similar. Insights. How does one travel from city to city or from surface to inner city? Sharula. Probably the most common method is what we call the tubes. It is a series of underground trains. We've bored tunnels that run underneath all the oceans and all the continents and connect all the cities and several of the retreats. The trains, which look very much like a subway train, are run on a cushion of air, an electromagnetic cushion, so they never actually touch the sides of the tunnel. This cushion creates a force field without friction, and therefore they can achieve very high speeds. The trains are capable of running over 3,000 miles per hour. Insights. Between the surface and the inner cities, how does one travel? Sharula, there are several entrances that open to the surface. We'll use that method, or we'll use a ship which is run by the Silver Fleet. Insights: the Silver Fleet. Explain that, please. Sharula. The Silver Fleet is made up of beings from the Agarthine cities. Many of the ships that people see in the air are Silver Fleet ships, except for the Nasties. Insights: how can you identify a Silver Fleet ship as opposed to the Nasties, as you call them? Sharula. All the Confederation ships run off of divine geometrics, or rather, cosmic geometrics, Branton. The ships will be either cylinder, cigar, or they will be saucer-shaped, or they will be round. There are not a lot of protrusions and angles. They have a tendency to be smooth. The ships that come in boomerang shapes and other weird configurations are usually not Confederation ships. Note, although this may be true to some extent, in recent years, according to some reports, the Saurian Greys have begun to use the disc or saucer shape also more frequently. The triangular craft seen en masse in Belgium, etc. are apparently Grey craft according to abductees there, which would tend to confirm some of what Bonnie or Sharula is saying. Also, these boomerang craft have often been seen in connection with the Arcoleta sub-base network of the southwestern United States, which would seem to indicate from what Sharula has said that the Dulce network is largely under the control of the Nasties, or the Draconian powers, as many other sources allege that it is. Branton. Insights: let's talk about the people themselves, the Telosians. What would a typical Telosian look like? Sharula. The typical Telosian has a slightly golden tone to their skin and have a tendency toward high cheekbones and slightly almond-shaped eyes. Most Telosians run toward light hair, and we have all eye colors. The men are generally 7 to 7 in height, and the women are generally 6 to 7 in height. When we come to the surface, we have a process of altering the molecules of our bodies so that we are able to appear the same height as people here on the surface. Insights: does your civilization have any of the social problems that ours seem to have, like pollution, hunger, homeless people, and water droughts? Sharula. No. We don't have pollution because we are able to monitor our systems at all times. We have learned to accelerate the atom. When the first scientists started working with atoms, they didn't realize that they weren't meant to shatter the atom for energy. They were meant to accelerate the atom for energy that won't die out and won't produce hazardous afterform. Because we learned to accelerate the atoms, we were also able to dematerialize all of our waste matter and return it back to its original form. Insights: is the United States government aware of the existence of Telos and the other underground cities? Sharula. Yes. For a long time they have been trying to get in, to access the information of Telos and the Silver Fleet. The promise of what they need would be given to them, but in return there are several things they have to do or quit doing. Insights: what was it that they were given to do or stop doing? Sharula. Basically, return the country to what it was founded on and return to an open and honest government, so that every citizen has access to what's happening in the government. Note, that is constitutionally based government, Bill of Rights, etc. If this is Sharula's interpretation of an open government, then we must assume that the Telosians, or at least many of them, are opposed to the present plans to establish a one-world socialist dictatorship or new world order, which will no doubt impose tremendous threats upon individual liberty of conscience. The reader may recall the information from an earlier file to the effect that human benevolents were working with the United States government in the Nevada military complex against the Saurian Greys. Their teachings stated that the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights was very much respected by them. Also, could these be allied with the same human aliens who landed in Florida after the 2 giant asteroid ships took up a geosynchronous orbit around the Earth, and warned us not to have any dealing with these gray aliens, and offered their own assistance if we disarmed our nuclear weapons? Were they tied in with the Telosian Blondes or the Pleiadian Nordics? Some accounts suggest that both human groups are at least aware of each other, and possibly have an alliance with each other. Now that the Soviet Union has broken up and the need for intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles has been decreased, will the United States government break off their self-destructive alliance with the Greys and instead seek alliances with the human groups who had originally warned them about the Greys? Branton. Insights: are you referring to the government's interaction with other extraterrestrial and/or inerterrestrials, Branton, that are not of the Silver Fleet? Note, The interviewer is no doubt referring to the pact which the secret government was manipulated and deceived into making with the reptilian Greys, and subsequently with other branches of the serpent race. Branton. Sharula, yes. That is only one. Insights. When was the government first introduced to Telos? Sharula. They have been aware of the subterranean cities, and they have been aware of Telos since the country's conception. It is only near the turn of the century that they started taking action. This action did not get really aggressive until the 1950s. Note, there are indications that some members of certain Masonic-type secret government societies, such as the Rosicrucian Order, have attempted to establish contact with the subterranean residents of Mount Shasta, although it is uncertain just what might have come of this. Several encounters with the Blondes, both subterran and exterran, have revealed their own concern about what is taking place with the abductions and mutilations of human beings by the Soroid Greys, although many of these groups claim that they cannot interfere with the problem due to some cosmic law of non-intervention. This may be true with those Nordic or Blonde societies who hail from other planetary bodies, such as the Taurians, Lyrans, Eridanians, and Cetusians, the latter of whom seem to be taking the most action to help their brothers here on Earth, in essence interfering with the Saurian interferers from the Draconas, Boots, Reticuli, Canis, etc. constellations, and the solar tribunal groups of Mars, Luna, Saturn, etc., and so on. However, in the case of the Telosian-Agartian alliance, this non-intervention policy would not apply, since this is their world also, and they are just as native to Earth as anyone else living on this planet. In light of this fact, and especially in light of their own awareness of the reptilian Saurian threat, we would urge them, if by chance they are reading this, to reconsider such a stance and join with their fellow human brothers and sisters on the surface in defending our society from this ancient threat.